Morning, everybody. Whoa. I do feel like a professor up here. My name is March Gallagher. I'm the Chief Strategy Officer for Hudson Valley Pattern for Progress. This is not a class today, so you don't have to hide in the back room, supervisor, mayor. It would be great if people want to move up. I promise you, you will not get called on by our panelists and presenters today. Am I right? You won't call on anybody? You might. Okay. Please come down and don't let our presenters feel lonely. I'm going to wait. I'm going to wait a minute. I'm going to pause. Come on, somebody get up. Come on down. The price is right. All right. No, just all kidding aside. So welcome today to our Urban Action Agenda event, Downtown Turnaround. We're thrilled that you're able to join us. I want to first note that this event is sponsored by AKRF, Orange and Rockland Utilities, and thanks so much to our host, Rockland County Community College, providing a lot of services for us here today and a great space in a central location, so we're just thrilled to be here. Pattern for Progress is turning 50 this year. We've been around since 1965. I assume most of you know who we are and what we do, but I'm going to just give a brief overview in case you don't. We're a 9-county regional public policy and planning organization that covers Rockland and Westchester up through Greene and Columbia counties. We've been around since 1965. We're focused on quality of life public policy research. So that means what we study and what we publish on changes over time. And right now we are thrilled to be focused on urban centers. In light of our 50th anniversary, our board of directors set our strategic agenda for the next few years, and they identified 2 main areas of focus they wanted us to look at. There are some materials on the table in the back of the room about our 50th if you want to take a peek at that, but one of those areas is the efficiency and equity of public education resources, not focused on curriculum, but more looking at shared services, consolidation. Are we getting our bang for the buck? College and career readiness. We'll have a report coming out on that soon. And then the second area is looking at reinvesting in our urban centers. Pattern has a long history of doing this. We have one of our former CEOs in the room who was talking to me earlier about some of the work we've done in the past. And under our current CEO, Jonathan Drapkin, we're refocused on this now. But I just want to note that as we were looking back over our history, we were looking at one of the first regional planning reports that Pattern put out in 1973 called A Development Guide for the Hudson Valley. And if you go back to that document, what you see is we knew in 1973 that we should be following smart growth principles. We didn't call it that at the time. And in light of our 50th, our board of directors has really focused us to look at this now. Urban centers are where we have infrastructure. Urban centers are where investment is going to have a bigger multiplier effect. We have these great centers of activity in the Hudson Valley, and not everywhere can boast what we have. We are not one central city, right? We are a constellation of cities. We are a distributed network of small centers, hamlets, villages, cities, towns. And those areas are what makes the region so vibrant. So we are thrilled to be working on urban centers at this time. I want to note that for this Urban Action Agenda project, which involves really focused look at 25 urban centers in the Hudson Valley, and by urban center, it doesn't have to be a city. It can just be a place, a hamlet. We are supported by generous support from the Ford Foundation, and we are working and collaborating with Regional Plan Association to ensure that the Hudson Valley's perspective is fully incorporated into the 4th Regional Plan for the New York Metro region, which we're thrilled about. Because we have, although we have small cities, we have the same big city problems as everybody else. Infrastructure, crime, vacancies, and in some places we are suffering either flat or declining population. Not everywhere in the valley, but there are places where we are suffering that, and we want to make sure that we continue to attract people to our urban centers so that we do not see continued decline of population. I am going to turn it over in 1 minute to someone to make an to Mike Welty to make an introduction of our next speaker, but I want to note one last thing, which is that Pattern's focus on urban centers is echoing throughout the valley. We're not the only ones talking about this. The Regional Council, the Governor's Mid-Hudson Regional Economic Development Council, is refocusing their strategy to look at urban centers. There is a big number on the table right now through the Upstate Revitalization Initiative. We're going to be competing as a region for $500 million. There's a great opportunity, and we're really pleased to see that the Regional Council is also looking at urban centers. That is going to be one of their main themes. How do we reinvest in urban centers? So it is a great time to hear from the experts we have here today. It's going to help you all in your planning, writing CFAs, and making other investments in your region. So I think it's a tremendous opportunity to really focus on that. Now, let me actually, before I introduce Mike Welty, I want to introduce President Cliff Wood, who serves on the Regional Council for Rockland County Community Colleges and focuses on many issues in that capacity. Thank you, President Wood. If you could say a few words.
Thank you very much. Welcome to Rockland Community College. I always tell the folks, the residents of Rockland, who come, this college belongs to this community, so it's very appropriate that you all are here this morning and we host this initiative that looks at this region. One of the things she mentioned, I am a member of the Mid-Hudson Regional Economic Development Council. Al Samuels is my partner in crime in this, and he's right back there. And one of the things I've learned over the last 4 years is if we really think about workforce development, and of course with workforce development comes the need for urban renewal, to have centers where you want businesses to come and people to come and do business, to be safe and clean and have everything from good sewers to good lighting. So one of the things I know is that we have to think regionally. And I was thinking that a little bit. I was explaining to some students about that the other day, and I said it's really part of our history. If you look at your money, and it has that little Latin phrase, e pluribus unum, one for many, that's what we need to think about today as we plan in this region to submit hopefully a regional application for this urban renewal initiative. And I can tell you from reading lots of applications over the last 4 years that the thing that moves you further along are when there's collaboration, when a whole lot of people have made an investment, and when you show the greatest impact. So while you may be interested in your particular community, as you think about what you want to do in that community, think about how you can join with other similar communities and join together to do something that will have an impact on the region. Because that really, we have to think about that economic development, workforce initiatives as a regional effort here in this particular area, the Mid-Hudson Valley. So I encourage all of you to do that. I would tell you that if you have questions, Al and I both are willing to come meet with you, to talk with you, to come talk to groups as you prepare either a CFA application, and those are due July the 30th, or this bigger initiative that we're going to do together. I really encourage you, but I can tell you if you're going to be successful, if you can think about partnering with other people and having a greater impact, you're going to have a greater opportunity to be successful. We were very successful last year. We're working on a couple of very exciting initiatives. We're working on a Biotech Innovation Center that will be regional. As a community college, Rockland Community College is part of a consortium. We have a consortium of the community colleges that are here in the lower Hudson Valley, and we are doing things together because we know, again, that regional impact. So I know you're going to get lots of good information today, and again, we're glad you're at Rockland Community College, and any way that we can be of help to you as you work on these initiatives, we're available. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Wood. I just want to say one last thing before I introduce our next speaker, and that is to say we're really close to 900 likes on Facebook, and that's my goal. So if anybody here hasn't liked Hudson Valley Pattern for Progress on Facebook, please consider it today. I'm going to introduce now Michael Welty. He is our Vice President for Urban and Regional Planning. I got it. Okay. And he'll give an overview of the day and our next speaker. Thanks.
Okay, good morning, everyone. Thanks for being here. I wanted to, before I introduce the first speaker, just mention that in our work, working with the supervisors and mayors in the various communities in the Hudson Valley, as we start our urban action agenda, one of the topics that seems to come up very frequently is topics related to transportation. And we see, especially in the lower part of the valley, a tremendous interest in taking advantage of transit-oriented development, basically the Metro North stations and the idea that people can commute both down to New York and reverse commute up to their communities as a real opportunity. The other topic that around transportation that we hear a lot about is parking, and there's always seems to be concern about parking. That's the big problem. The community that I used to live in, which was actually further upstate, we used to talk about parking quite a lot, and many of us would say that we don't really have a parking problem, we have a walking problem, right? There's plenty of parking out there, but we need to figure out how to get people to it more easily, how to make them comfortable getting from their car to wherever it is that they want to go. Certainly people are used to walking, they walk great distances to get from their car to the store at the mall or something like that, but we need to get them used to doing that on our downtown streets as well. And I think our first speaker, David Fields, AICP, who's a transportation planner, someone I've known for many years, will give us a lot of good ideas on both of those subject areas. He came right to mind when we were talking about this topic, and I'm very glad that David was available to be here today. So with nearly 20 years of national and international experience, David's work focuses on projects that support communities' long-term goals, including economic development, environmental sustainability, and quality of life. His favorite work is creating great places in downtowns and around transit stations because they include all components of transportation planning: pedestrians and bikers, parking and transportation demand management, transit and private vehicles, plus a commitment to involving the public. David's experience includes planning stations and station areas from Metro North Railroad, light rail in Phoenix, streetcars in New Orleans, and downtowns as small as 1 block and as big as Abu Dhabi. That's impressive. He is the immediate past chair of the American Planning Association's Transportation Planning Division. Ultimately, David believes that great places offer transportation choice that works for people of all ages and abilities and makes traveling so easy that people complain about the weather instead. And actually, or they can complain about the Mets. We are both Mets fans, and we've been suffering together for a long time. So, David, why don't you come on up, and we'll get David started. Thank you.
In the meantime. So good morning, everybody. I'm really honored to come up here and speak today. I'm a New York boy, born and bred. Grew up on Long Island, went to college at Binghamton, worked for Metro North, is a Mets fan, fortunately or unfortunately. And I like to apply everything I've learned, but I use a lot of what I call David logic, David science. You'll hear a lot of this today, things like my grandmother test. Could my grandmother cross that street? If not, what can we do about it? Because if she couldn't cross it, then I don't want to live there. And that's a lot of what you're going to see today. So we're going to start with transit-oriented development, and then we're going to move into parking. But I'd like you to think of both of these together, because the lessons are not, well, if we're going to do TOD, we do this, and if we're going to talk about parking this, it's all interrelated. Before we talk about any of that, though, if you leave here with nothing else today, know this. Anybody who tells you that you should be looking at half a mile distance, quarter-mile distance, ignore them immediately. Okay? It doesn't matter. You cannot ask one of your family members how far away something is, how far something a half a mile away is. What they know is how far 5 minutes is, how far 10 minutes is. Okay? We need to think in terms of people. I'd like to give you an example. So it's a little hard to see, but this is Benjamin Franklin Parkway in Philadelphia. These are both the same place. Very early on in my career, we were asked to count all the parking spaces and all the cars in those parking spaces in a quarter mile and a half mile. I said, okay, we can do that. But there's a river here. You really want us to count parking spaces over here for people going over here? And the client said, well, it's in the scope. You got to do it. Like, all right, we'll go do it. So we did. It was a big waste of time because nobody parking in these spaces cared about going here. But instead, on our own, we're like, well, let's see about how long it takes to walk places. So this is the Parkway again, and it's a big, wide street. Would not pass my grandmother test. And if you're standing here, you can only get about here in 5 minutes because the signal takes you so long. And you can get about here in 10 minutes. So this is how far people will go for parking. This is what people care about. This was irrelevant. So now we'll talk about transit-oriented development. So what is it? Let's start with the easy stuff. It actually doesn't start with transportation, and this kind of blows a lot of planners' minds. It starts with land use. Has to be mixed use. Anything that is all residential, all office, doesn't work because it ends up not working for transportation. Because in the morning, everybody goes in one direction. In the afternoon, everybody goes in the other direction. That's not what you want. We want people going in both directions. Ideally, we have one thing on the ground floor, something interesting, something that people can walk by and take a look at, and then more private space on second and third and fourth floors, offices, residential. And this next one, this scares a lot of people. We need to get a little more density. Now, we're not saying this has to be Midtown Manhattan. There's a big, big stretch between downtown Liberty and downtown Manhattan, okay? But if you really are serious about it, we at least want to be aiming for 20 to 30 units per acre. Now, that balances if you also have more employment, and we can talk about if people are interested exactly, what the science shows that works. But we have to push past 1 unit per acre, 4 units per acre. It's hard to get enough people to matter on the market if you're talking in those numbers. We want to encourage public facilities, and this is also a tricky one because shouldn't this all be done by the private sector? There's a lot of real value the public sector adds, whether it's green space, whether it's a community college, whether it's an office of the local municipality, whatever it is, these are the places we want people to be because in a minute we're going to talk about we're going to invest here in the transportation to bring everybody here. So we want to recoup all that investment by giving them the services they need anyway. And we want to discourage land uses that absolutely require driving. Okay, so one of the TOD projects we did actually in Cleveland a while ago, the very first RFP they put out for the site, the developer submitted a used car lot. And we said, you're not getting this. A car lot, by definition, one way or the other, you're driving, either you're going to get a car, you're going to drop off your car. We need to rethink this. Okay, so we need to move away from those. It's more than just a land use, it's how you design it also. So what I was talking about, active uses on the first floor too, because people like to look into things. We want big windows, we want doors, we want people to walk down the street and say, oh, what's in that next thing? What do I want to look at next? Excuse me. We want smaller blocks. One of the big things we found in the 60s and 70s, we built these big super blocks, and it was hard to see what was on that next corner. So people didn't go to the next corner. We want it to be far enough that, just far enough that it's kind of teasing you away. We want to bring buildings up to the sidewalk because nobody really wants to walk through 2 or 3 bays of parking to get to a front door. We want it to be comfortable. We want it to be interesting. And anyway, if there's a break, these are good opportunities for public space, for green space, for benches, something that says, we want you to be here even if you're not going into a store. We want you to be here on your lunch hour. We want you to be here on your break. One of the great opportunities for, I'm guessing I should have asked, most people around the room, elected officials or planning people? Yes, generally in that range? Okay, so this should all speak to you. You have control of your zoning. This is not national, this isn't state, this zoning is local, okay? You have all the control, so if you are limiting height, limiting density, requiring setbacks, putting in very high parking requirements, which we'll get to a little later, you are doing all the things against transit-oriented development. Now, I'm not saying get rid of all your parking requirements and require 40-story buildings, but at least let's get rid of some of the caps. If a developer wants to come in and say, I see potential here, don't let your zoning code be the thing that stops you from what you want to do anyway. It's worth the hard look. So the bottom line really should be allow your codes to allow transit-oriented development as of right. Okay, now we'll finally get to transportation. First of all, TOD is not train-oriented development. Okay? It's a big common myth we hear all the time. How can we build TOD? We don't have a train station. It is wonderful that Metro North, New Jersey Transit on the west side serving as for Metro North, that you have rail service out here, but it doesn't have to be that or nothing. Okay? Let's be very, very clear here. The things that I mentioned first, the design, the land use, the mix, the density, those are the things that have to be there. And if you happen to have transit, great. Okay? They need to allow pedestrians to get around in a compact area and have things to do. And even if you do all that, you still don't necessarily need a train. It could be good bus service. It can be good light rail. It can be ferry. It can be really bikes and walking. If you happen to have trains, mazel tov. That's great. That's money in the bank. But it doesn't have to be, I don't have it, so I can't move on with my life. The transit you do provide has to hit certain standards, and this is where the confusion comes from. It's got to be all day. It's got to be frequent. It's got to be reliable. It's got to be easy to use, and it's not easy for you because you kind of live in this world of understanding government things. It's got to be for my grandmother, your sibling, your mother-in-law, whoever it is who never gets on a bus. It has to be easy for them, and that's how we have to be thinking of these things. It's all the things that make up the transit schedule for a train applied to all these other modes. This shouldn't be that difficult, but we've given this cachet to trains. It's not the trains. It's not even the rail. It's not even the right-of-way. It's saying we're going to invest and we're going to provide that level of service, which we can do anywhere. Okay. I mentioned I grew up in a small town on Long Island. That's Sunrise Highway. Anybody familiar with it? Anybody have a comparable to Sunrise Highway in their town? Okay. So imagine that. And this is how we developed 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s, bit today still. What we did was we put a lot of individual land uses around this big arterial road. And around every single one of these standalone uses, we put a big parking lot. A lot of times because our zoning code said we had to. So what do? We drive in the morning, and my mother used to drive us to school. She'd go to work. She'd park at each of these places, come back and get us at the end of the day, go to soccer practice, go to the grocery store, come back and get us at soccer practice, and drive home. And that's what our car did every single day. That was how many parking spaces used by that one car every single day, and those were all the turning movements on Sunrise Highway every single day by one family's trips. Okay? And if you know anything about traffic, straight is actually really easy. Turns are what screw everything up. Okay? And you can align these any way you want. You're going to end up with just about the same number of turns. There are other options. Okay? So let's start talking about mixed use. All those same land uses, and start to share that parking. So it starts to look like this. Still have Sunrise Highway, but we have a grid of smaller streets breaking it up to allow access. And you have all the exact same square footage of all that same land use, but clustered together as opposed to further apart. And allowing parking that can be shared. So instead of one for one everywhere all around, we can actually drive in, park once, and from that one spot, you can walk to all those same land uses. At the end of the day, still going to play, going to work, coming back, going back. One parking spot, two turning movements off the big arterial. Okay, half the parking, half the land area used, which means it can be used for anything else your town wants to use it for. That can be more development down here. That could be green space. That could be whatever you want. Arterial is moving better, so your Department of Transportation is much, much happier. Fewer arterial movements, and a quarter the vehicle miles traveled. Okay? And all the great things that come when we actually drive a little bit less without stopping anybody from doing everything they wanted to do anyway. It goes even a little bit further, and this is where TOD comes in. Okay? So we're not telling anybody don't drive. And this is a very important message. Okay? This is not taking away choice. Saying if you want to drive, everything we just said you can still do. But if you are comfortable getting on our light rail or a bus or a train, you can take that in exactly into this mixed-use area. You can walk to all those things because they're all close enough to do that. You can do all the same trips. You can activate all those same land uses. You can spend all the same dollars. And at the end of the day, sorry, that's not working exactly right. Whoops. Oh, that didn't work. Go back. There we go. At the end of the day, you go back. The train's supposed to go back at the end of the day. And if we're smart enough and we can actually put some residential in this area also, then you can do everything and you don't even need the transit. You're close enough you can walk to all those things. And your car can stay put. You can have a car. Nobody's telling you not to. Okay? But you don't need to use it every single day. And that's the value of the transit-oriented development and all the smart practices we just discussed. Okay? But it takes a little work to get to this. You all work in government or you work with government, you know it's not, okay, we should do this, yay, we'll move on with our lives. There are some practices and I want to share them with you. So it all starts with the pedestrian. Okay? Everybody walks. Okay? I don't care if you drove from your front door to the parking lot across the way here, you walked at some point today. You walked across the little ring road, you walked into your car, you stopped somewhere, got coffee, whatever it is, you walked at some point. So it's got to start with that. So how do we get people walking around, whether to the train, to a development, to a land use, to school, without being hit by a car? Okay? That, can we agree not being hit by a car is a good standard? Okay. It's actually relatively simple. A colleague in my office who Mike knows, Michael King, can't believe we get paid to do this. And I tell him, shh, we're consultants, don't say that. He says everything is simple, but it has to be site-specific. You cannot take a big manual off a shelf and say the design we used in place here is going to be the same as what we use here. Okay? It has to be looked at specifically to what you are trying to access. You have to pay attention. Okay, here are the 6 keys to it. It starts with safety. Okay? It's got to be safe to cross the street. My grandmother should be able to cross safely and feel like she can. Okay? Otherwise, people aren't going to want to move here, aren't going to want to cross a street until they absolutely have to. What we want is them to feel comfortable to do it because they want to do it and they feel comfortable doing it. The biggest indicator is vehicle speed on that street. The research is in. If you keep speeds under 30 miles per hour, preferably under 25, even if you get hit, the damage is relatively minor. If you get hit by a car when the car is going over 45, it's a little hard to see, but these triangles up here, that's death. We don't want death, right? Right, we don't want death. So keep the speeds down, let people cross the street safely. Next one is security. I'm not going to name the town, but this is the block after the fix. People said, I don't feel safe walking down this street. It's kind of dark. And we're not really sure what's going on. So their fix was this. Anybody really want to walk down this street late at night? No. It's not just about what the police stats show. It's about what people feel comfortable doing, and we have to think through their eyes. We want pedestrian routes to be straight and direct. So these are 3 crossings, all in the same city. Do people want to go around the barrier to cross the street? Do they want to hop over the barrier to go across the street, or do they just want to walk across the street? Okay. Site-specific, human scale, let's take a look at what things people are doing. And if you really need some math, if you add 30 seconds to any walking trip, people will stop doing it. 30 seconds. And if you want to ever test it, we found this highway capacity manual. They did a whole lot of research. We did a lot of easier research. Stand by an elevator. Elevator's not coming for more than 30 seconds. Somebody's going to press that button again. That's this right here. Okay. And when we say direct, we actually mean direct and present. This is a pretty good bus stop, bus shelter in St. Louis area. Okay? Can anybody tell me how to walk to it? On the grass, in the street. Anybody tell me how somebody on crutches, in a wheelchair, pushing a stroller, I don't know, heels. This does not invite people to take the bus. This could be the best bus service in the world. This is going to make it difficult. Let's stop putting barriers up. Ease of entry. We want it to be very simple. stairs are okay. We don't want too many of them, and we don't want them too high. And another one of David's science says, don't build a staircase taller than David. I'm 6 feet tall. So if I'm standing at the base of the staircase, if this is less than 6 feet, I can see what's up there, and most people can also. Okay? That's as tall as it should be. Yes, slope and pitch and all those things are important. Let people be able to see what's at the top of the staircase, and they will walk up those stairs to go to that staircase. Would like it to be comfortable, waiting environment. Mike might remember this picture because he was on this field trip, but I'm not going to name the town. There's a hardworking town upstate where there's a transit agency and they run a pretty good service, and there's the town and they work really hard, and the town decided they were going to make life easier for their bus riders and put garbage cans at the bus stops, and it was actually a very nice thought. Unfortunately, they put them exactly where the door of the bus pulls up. So no matter what happens now, somebody has to be in the street. Okay? We need to think from the user side. And lastly, we'd like it to be aesthetically pleasing. I'll admit, I'm not a design guy. This looks pretty good to me. I got a comment actually recently saying, well, it's actually hard to walk on brick in heels. Anybody feel like I should be taking this out of this? I need a different slide. I'm kind of surveying my audiences now to tell me.
You can chase dinosaurs in heels now.
Okay. I don't know what that means, but okay, got it. Okay, so this is all right? I can keep this? It looks nice. It looks encouraging. There's a bench. You kind of can't see it, but it's a sidewalk that I'd say, oh, you know, this is a nice enough place to walk. We want to encourage through design. What I was mentioning earlier, articulations is the formal term for windows and doors at street level, so people can look in. This encourages people to want to walk around that corner. And even in a parking lot, which is usually the least pedestrian friendly, put in some green. This is much nicer to walk through than without it. Let's not forget about bikes. Bikes can increase the share of people coming to TOD, to transit, to your land uses by 10%. Okay? I don't know how many bikers you have in the area, but it is easy enough on good routes to go 10 miles away. And that's much, much further than you get from walking. But it's got to be easy. We have to encourage people to do this. We actually need to provide places for people to lock up their bikes, and it can't just be on a signpost at the corner. It's not fair. We would never leave a car like that. Okay? It needs to be a place with eyes on the street, preferably weather protected. And really, if we're serious about this, and bikes are more and more becoming a part of our communities of all scales, a place to shower when you get there. And that doesn't have to be a standalone shower or you have to build a bathroom. Gyms, health clubs, community centers, if you can work out deals that your employees can use this just in the morning when they're least crowded anyway, they can bike, shower, come to work, that we're finding is a huge boon and really increases the bike share. So you're going to go back and you're going to say, oh, I heard this kind of kooky guy who had all this weird science, and your DOT director, somebody at the state's going to say, oh, but what does that do to level of service? Right? You guys come up with this argument before? What is that going to mean for car traffic? So let's be clear when you get that question what we're aiming for. Mike mentioned in my bio that I work on projects that support communities' goals. I've never once read in a community vision plan that their goal is better level of service. Okay? Their goal is economic development, quality of life, environmental sustainability. So these are two places, kind of crowded street to drive on, a lot of people walking up and down, kind of empty street, empty street. If I was an engineer, I'd say this is verging on level of service F, and this is level of service A. This is what your traffic engineer will tell you you are supposed to be aiming for. And your economist will say the exact opposite. Okay? This is people on the street. These are cars going slow enough they can look in your store windows. This is nobody. This is economic development failure. Okay? So when we say we are going to do things differently, let's understand there are trade-offs. but we're willing to trade this off for this. Because what you get is what you plan. If you want level of service A, you get a big wide road, you get big sweeping turn lanes, and you get a whole lot of parking and a whole lot of empty parking most of the day. But if you want all those things, you will never have this. It's one or the other. And understand going in, what you plan is what you get. So the bottom line for TOD, mixed uses bring people, density brings people, design makes it more comfortable for people, make it pedestrian accessible so people can actually walk around, manage your parking, we'll talk about that more in a sec, so it's more people with fewer cars, and transportation choice so you have people with options to get around. And what you end up with are active, convenient, people-focused places. That is the lesson of TOD. I'm going to keep going into parking, and we're going to do questions towards the end. Okay, so parking. Look familiar to anyone? Yeah. This is what happens. This is what happens. This is why parking is so important. So here's where we start. Space can only do one thing. Can we all agree on that? This desk can only be a desk right now. Okay? So who has been out to dinner sometime in the last week or two? Okay. If you went out with 4 people, you probably sat at a table somewhere around 25 square feet. When I worked at Metro North, I had the biggest cube I'd ever had in my career, and I measured it, and I had 72 square feet, and I was in work heaven. Okay? But if I had driven to that restaurant or driven to work, I did not drive to Grand Central, but my car all day long would have been sitting in 200 square feet doing absolutely nothing while I was spending money or I was earning money. Okay? This is the lesson of parking that we need to understand. Space can only do one thing at a time. So if we require a lot of space for parking, we get less space for everything else. So how much is too much? I am asked this all the time. How much do we need? Just tell us the number. It's a myth. There is no perfect one right answer. Okay? Every community's got to decide this on their own, and it varies. Okay? It varies depending on your demand, your land use, what other transportation options are available. You just heard that we could get people here by bus and by train and by walking and by bike. If we could do that, wouldn't we need less vehicle parking? That's not an issue of the land use, that's an issue of the transportation system. So let's not confuse how much we have versus how much we need. It's important, though, to get it right because it consumes land. Physically, there's a lot of it. It's freaking expensive, and too much of it makes it hard to walk around. So let's start with cost. Very round numbers we've been using for a long time, just so you have them. Surface space costs $10,000 each. Garage space costs $20,000 each. And a below ground space costs $40,000 each. But here's the kicker. Once you build it, it is a sunk cost. You cannot later say, well, nobody's using that, so I'm not going to pay the bond on it. You don't get out of paying for parking once you've decided to build it, so you better know how much you want to build. You want to build as less, at least as possible, so you have to pay as little as possible. Too much parking puts people really far away from where they want to be. That's a train station in Philadelphia. That's my car, by the way. That's the only car in the lot on a weekday. Okay? Nobody will ever park at this top level of this garage, even though they claim they don't have enough parking. So a lot of our parking, a lot of our required parking is in our zoning codes. Everybody familiar with parking requirements and zoning codes? Yeah, okay, so where did those numbers come from? Anybody know? I didn't say I wouldn't call on anybody. Anybody want to take a guess? Did Robert Moses develop it? Did someone say Florida? Florida like the state or the professor? Tell me what you mean.
Didn't ITE get their ratios from developments in Florida?
Some of them ITE, the big manual, we're going to get to 1 second. I'm glad you're thinking like that. But Robert Moses, who's many people tell me, well, he probably had something to do with it. He built most of the region. He had nothing to do with parking requirements. Go back further. So we say, well, okay, further, Daniel Burnham, big famous planner, Chicago World's Fair. No, he had nothing to do with parking requirements. Go back further, Adam and Eve. No. None of these people had anything to do with your municipality's parking requirements. Most of them came from the ITE Parking Generation Manual, which is actually a falsehood. Okay? And if you read their own introduction, they say, do not use this manual to set your parking requirements. Okay? But everybody ignores that because this is easy. What this says is they looked at all these sites across the country, a lot of them from Florida, and said, how many spaces are being used at these places? That takes not into account pedestrian access, transit access, pricing, management. It just says, given everything is even, how many spaces are being used at each land use? So that says the coffee shop in Kenosha, Wisconsin should be the same parking as you have in your town. Maybe not exactly how we want to do planning. Okay. The other way places do it is that they say, well, my neighbor town has this in their code, so we did it also. And if you ask them, they probably say from someone else, and sooner or later, it usually comes back to ITE. These requirements end up generating more parking than space, than active land use. We did a little study out in Ventura, California. So the gray is the amount of actual built land by land use, daycare center, college, whatever it is, and this is the amount of parking required for each of those. So for a bar, for every 1 square foot of building, they have 4.5 square feet of parking. And that's what our minimum parking requirements require us to build, because we put it in our zoning codes, which means when a developer comes in and says, I want to build X in your town, this is what they think they have to do. Let's free them up from this. There are other options, and I won't tell you which is the right option for your town. And anybody who gets up and says, I know exactly for all couple of hundred of you what the right answer is, be skeptical. Okay? It's got to depend on what your goals are. Okay? And these goals are easy to identify. Typical requirements, build a lot of parking. And then that parking usually has to be free because the cost has got to be spread across everybody, because no one user would ever pay enough to cover it. Okay? But if we go down the scale a little, if we say, well, maybe we'll tailor our minimum requirements, maybe we'll actually study our own uses. We've got a town, or we've got 2 or 3 towns that are kind of similar. Let's go out and count. How many people are using things where there's a bus, where there's a train, where there's bike lanes, where there's mixed use, where there's walkability? And let's figure out for ourselves what our zoning code should say. Okay, well, that seems like a pretty fair approach. You can actually say, forget it, planner, you should not be in the business of parking. Developers know how much parking they need there. You don't want to build any more parking than they absolutely have to have, because that's all money. The less expensive they can make their project and still make it a sellable project, the better it is for everybody. They're not going to build anything they can't sell. They certainly don't want to build 10 extra parking spaces at $20,000 each. That's got to be covered by somebody. Let's say you guys know your business. We don't tell you, what kind of fixtures to put in. We don't tell you what kind of glass, the shadow. You figure out your own parking. Or you can actually say, we have a multimodal transportation system. We have a mixed-use district. We're actually going to cap how much parking everybody can put in. Okay? We know at most we need is X, and everybody can divvy it up, but you can't go above X. I can't tell you which is the right approach for you, but what I can tell you is, as you're further in this direction, you generate more traffic, you generate more pollution, and you add to your housing costs. So if we're dealing with an affordability crisis on housing, if we're dealing with a high cost of development, this is just adding to it. If we go further this way and we're freeing it up and we're taking those off the pro formas, then we're actually making it easier to develop at a better cost for everybody. It's not saying we're not going to build any parking. We're not taking the choice away from everybody. We're saying we're going to build to what we actually need based on our context. And when we build it, let's not build it exactly so the parking is the thing we see. It's kind of famous parking garage in Chicago. It's unfortunate that this is one of the most famous things in Chicago. They've got much nicer architecture. This is a small town out on Long Island. This is what you see from the train station. There's actually a beautiful little main street doing pretty good stuff, but you'd never know it getting off the train. If we're going to provide parking, let's make sure it is serving our community. This is the ground floor of a parking garage. This is above it, that same building. When you are sitting here at this restaurant, you have no idea what's upstairs and behind you. This is parking that is supporting the main street without overwhelming it. It's doable. Yeah, it costs a little more. I'll be very honest with you. It is totally worth it to this main street. So that's all about off-street parking. Spend a couple of minutes on on-street, because this is usually even more difficult for people to swallow. Okay? Let's get it very, very straight. Cars don't spend money. Okay? People spend money. They come to your businesses, they leave their cars, and they do the thing they want to do. And absolutely everybody wants to be as close to that business to spend their money as they can get, right? Does anybody love parking at the far end of the lot? Or in a lot if there's a spot at the street? No, nobody likes doing that. So what we want to do is let our curbs accommodate as many people as possible throughout the day, each while they're spending money. And people who aren't going to spend money, or may spend money for a little while but then want to do a lot of things, let's get them to the spaces that let them do that. But the people who are coming in for an hour for a lunch, for 2 hours for a movie maybe, no more than that, let's get them to that curb if we can. Okay? If I'm going to work for 9 hours in my office, I should not be parked at the curb in front of my office. That space should be for the people coming to spend money. The only way to do it, it's a very nasty word coming up, is to price it. I know it's scary. I understand, and I'm not saying today you all need to make your curbs $10 an hour. Okay? We're going to get to how we figure it out. It is the only way to encourage people who want to spend money anyway to be parking there, and those who don't want to spend money to be parking somewhere else. Unfortunately, very much like our parking requirements, we have put meters in a really, really terrible position. Okay? Every town I know at some point in their lives have used their parking revenue to fill a budget hole. And from a lot of the nods, I'm guessing there are a lot around here too who have done that. That is not the job of parking, okay? And it can't serve two masters. Okay? You can either do smart parking management using your meters, or you can fill your budget gap. But don't confuse the two. And don't let people say, well, we're raising the parking meters so that our downtown will function better if it's just to raise revenue. Because just as often, we may decide to lower the price of the meter at a curb, or even get rid of it if that's the right thing to do, and that can't be done if you're trying to fill a budget hole. So here's the five. I'm big on step recovery processes, if you haven't noticed, for parking. So first, acknowledge the value of your curbs. There is value there. It is real estate. And the people who want to come into your stores, the ones who want to shop, are the ones who are willing to pay for that privilege. Okay? Keep it reasonable. We'll talk about the amounts in a sec. But let's figure out on the ones, so I should tell you the code here because you can't read the legend. Red and black are more than 95% filled, okay, all through the day. That means people desperately want to park on these blocks because these are really, really interesting land uses right there. Okay? Let's start charging them a little, because if we don't charge them, why would anybody leave? Me as an employee, why would I not want to park right there? I have no disincentive, and that means I'm costing a very valuable space from somebody who does want to be there. 2, let's balance the rates and demands. So I love this example. This is in Iowa. So there are meters on this side, and there are no meters on this side. Okay? Here there are time regulations. Here there are no time regulations. You can stay as long as you want, as long as you're willing to pay for it. Okay? Here I know I have to keep moving my car every hour. Okay? Here I am totally willing to pay because I want to go to the stores all around here. Here I don't want to have to run out and move my car every hour or two. This is inconvenient. I could make this totally free and no time regulation, but then I'll get one row of cars all day long. These will turn over all day long. This is what we're aiming for. So it could be a high price, it could be a low price. That has to be dependent on what you see in your community. The closer you are to those active land uses, the higher the price is probably going to be. Okay? The one right in front of the best restaurant in your town is probably going to be the highest price curb. The ones 4 blocks away are going to be less. And it makes sense to have graded scales. So people can choose. I am okay not paying for parking and walking a little bit. Or maybe I drop my family off and I go take my car further away. But let's give the people all the choices they want, and the people who really just want to pull up right in front will pay for that privilege. Sorry, one more thing on this. You got to make it easy to pay. This is a David pet peeve. I cannot stand places that only take quarters. Does anybody have a pocket full of change for their meters anymore? Does everybody have a cell phone on them? Okay. Don't make it hard to let people hand you money. It should be the first part of Business 101. Let's provide attractive alternatives that are free. Okay? So we're not saying you have to pay us to park. Let's provide off-street lots for our employees, for people coming long-term. Let's say if you want to be here long-term and you don't want to pay, we're going to ask you to be just a little bit further. Okay? But we're going to let you park. We're not taking away that privilege. Okay? But let's really start separating these people out. There are people out there who, if they want to come spend $40, $50 for a dinner, will spend $3 for the parking. Let's remove the time limits, because at no point should people feel like, oh, I'd have dessert here also, but the meter's going to expire and I've got to go run, otherwise I'm going to get a ticket. That's not helping anybody. If we're pricing it right, they should be able to stay. They'll decide when they are ready to leave or not. And let's keep the revenue local. This is also David's science, but I know this one works. Bribe people. Bribe your downtown businesses and say, the revenue we generate here from your meters, you get to decide what we build with it. They love this, okay? Whether it's lighting, security, trash pickup, street sweeping, marketing, whatever it is, you tell us, this is your customers coming to pay for this privilege. We want to give you these dollars back. Get all together. Figure out what it is. They become the biggest advocates for charging their curbs when they get to use the money for things that make them better anyway. So, we want to coordinate both the on-street and the off-street. So the off-street were all the zoning things we talked about first. The on-street was all the secondary stuff. The objective, we want to provide the least amount of parking in all of these systems together so that we have enough parking without letting the parking overwhelm our place. We don't want to hide the price. We want people to be very, very aware of it, and we want to be able to adjust it in our different places. We want to count regularly so we know we're doing it right, we're not guessing, and we want to keep that money local so the decisions are worth it. That's it. Thank you.
We have about 10 minutes for questions. Am I allowed to call on people at this point? Anybody with questions on either half of the presentation? No. Yes.
I've heard about the charging different pricing for parking, but I've never heard anyone explain how you actually communicate the different options to people on the way to.
Yeah, and that is probably the trickiest part of the whole setup. Places do it differently. Some say we have zones. So one city does in the real active downtown, every block in that area is going to be one price, and that's the purple zone. And the zone outside of it will be the green zone, and the free zone will be the blue zone, whatever it is. And all you need to know is what zone you're going in, and then in that zone is the prices, so you know, and it's very clearly tied to where the active land uses are, so people get it pretty quickly. What's getting easier and easier is cell phone-based systems, where your cell phone will actually tell you the price of a spot as you pull into it. There's still kind of disconnect between how much people should be looking at their cell phone while they're driving. That's still being worked on, but the systems are getting better for it. Yes.
I've seen zones where they limit the time based on the density or the use. And can you give an opinion on whether that works? Or is that
So I'm not a big fan of it because if I'm coming in to eat dinner, I don't want to have to worry about how long the waiter's taking compared to my parking, because everybody somehow in the back of their head knows the parking enforcement guy is going to be there the second my hour is up. That's not the experience we want to give our community. So how long do you make it that you know it's going to be enough? Is it 2 hours, 3 hours? It gets really, really tricky, and sooner or later people leave and say, well, I can go to the mall and not even worry about this. It's not the price that drives them away, it's the aggravation factor. Yes, sir.
Just the community I come from, when it was developed with two main streets that led to one common state road. And over the recent decades, say 20, 30, 40 years, most of the development has been on one of the streets, while the other main street's kind of been left behind, so to speak. So what you have is this one road that's really starting to look nice, and with this development, you have the other just, in the same community, less than 500 feet away, basically have another main street that runs through your community that is kind of falling apart. How do you try to address, do you bring up the one that's down, or do you concentrate more on the one that's up, and then kind of mold your community towards the one that is, and the population of the community is like 4,000 to 5,000, so it's not very large.
I'm going to take a couple of quick guesses, but I'll ask you to give me some leeway because I don't know the place, and I just like
Ulster County, Ellenville, New York.
Oh, I actually do know Ellenville. So the first question is there enough demand to support, I'm assuming you're talking retail, in both of these places? I'm not an economic development specialist, but what they've taught me is that people always overestimate the demand for retail. And I'd actually ask in the room if people have that common experience. And I don't know well enough to say, the amount you have on one block is enough, is not enough, you have enough for both blocks. But every time I do a project with a team, the economic development, we draw these pretty pictures with retail everywhere and housing above, and then the economic development guy says, will you just stop that? You have to keep it reasonable. So I guess the first step is make sure you're aiming for the right quantity of retail before you start shifting back and forth. But from the transportation side, which I can speak a little more knowledgeably about, is are they comparable in the characteristics people are looking for? Can you walk across both streets? Can you walk between the streets? Are they both accessible, or do they both feel safe? Are all those factors to help them succeed if the demand is there, to let them succeed? And it can be a pretty simple exercise. And the 6 things, the different checklists I just gave, I assume the PowerPoint's going to go up on a website sooner or later. It's yours. It's out in the open. You don't need me. I'm a terrible consultant, by the way. Take a walk around. Go with your planning commission, your council people, whoever it is, and say, this guy had some kooky ideas, but can we walk here? Is this safe? Do people feel as comfortable walking here as they do on this other one, aside from the actual things to do? And otherwise, let's make the checklist of what could we improve. Like, are the streets, are the crosswalks really clear? Is the lighting there? Does it feel unsafe? Because that may be the thing that's doing it. And you can address some of those at the same time as you're figuring out the demand. Sure. Yes.
How do you feel about smaller chain stores in a downtown environment, especially in the smaller communities like we have in the Hudson Valley?
I don't have a strong opinion one way or the other. What I know is stores of either chains or local, you can have good management and staff, even if it's a chain store, and you can have bad management and staff, even if it's a chain store that works on both sides of the house. If you have good partners, I would hate to tell them not to come in if they're doing all the right things just because they're a Starbucks or whatever. But beyond that, it's a little past what I can confidently speak about. The other thing is, I don't guess at things. I'm a really bad consultant. Yes?
You just mentioned that a lot of communities overestimate how much retail to bring into their ground floor. What is your feeling, or have you seen small businesses, maybe 5 to 10 employees, using retail space? What is your feeling of that? And also the second part of that question is, in Rockland County we have a couple of areas that are starting to come back, but we see a type of all one business like restaurants. How do you bring that mix? How do you attract that mix?
So the first half of the question, I'm going to call them professional services, but I don't. It's a broader term than that. It's desk jobs or more office-y environments. Wonderful. Just don't let them build big blank street walls so that nobody knows what's going on there. If they're going to be on the ground floor, there should be windows. And some businesses will love this. Artist Space seems to really like it for the light. Planners, and architects, we seem to really enjoy having people stare at us and point throughout the day. I'm guessing there's some that aren't going to, but there's enough mix in there. But it should be a very good land use for a street, even if you can't get retail. Programs that help diversify your employment base are fabulous. So just like we don't want all one land use, and we've categorized retail as one big land use, we really want to break that down and have restaurants supporting office, supporting groceries, supporting, we want this because that makes the flow back and forth work a lot better on the transportation side. It activates the street at 7 o'clock at night as well as 9 a.m. Saturday morning. And that's really what we're going for. And I know there was a third part of your question, but I've forgotten. Tell me one more time.
The programs to attract the mixed retail or mixed business use of a main street.
It's, again, a little beyond what I usually work in. I'd probably ask the economic development people to talk more about the programs, the state funds and things like that that can help. But what I know is, and this is held true in all size communities all across the country, interesting places bring different people who want to. One colleague of ours says it like this: identify your beach. So in Miami, that's easy. The beach is the beach. But in small towns, it may be the park. It may be a historic building. It may be something unique that says, this is why somebody would want to be here, and build on that. So in Cleveland, I'm doing a lot of work. And Case Western University and the Art Museum are their beach. They actually have a lake with a beach if it's not drawing anybody. They are building on their cultural establishments because it's different than what Detroit has and Chicago has. Find what is unique about your town. That's where you've got to start, because otherwise, why would somebody want to locate there? It's not just going to be about great parking or access. It starts with the land use. Yes.
You have the shared parking concept, which is awesome. I think one of the concerns in our community would be the liability. Like if you had people parking on your shared lot, but they're going over there, and now you're taking their spot. How do you kind of get around?
It's a myth, and it's been happening my whole career. Insurance and coverage, and we do this. If you guys are ready to help your businesses with their parking, it can be a common fund that pays for all the insurance across all the common spaces.
Would it become a municipal lot, or does
It
it privately owned?
can be private, it can be, we'll do your plowing if you cover our coverage. And, you know, there are tons of different trade-offs on this. This is what people use not to let things go forward. All the way in the back?
Oh, I was just wondering offhand what you think of Sharrows, because I come from Beacon where they implemented them, and there's a few residents that want to give it over completely to bicycles, but my experience is, okay, we're not back in the day anymore. My car personally has bucket seats, so I'm not going to move over across the bench seat to get out on, and I've darn near clocked some of them in the gut, you know, these cyclists.
For everybody, I'm guessing it's a common term these days. Sharrows is shared lane space. It's the chevron symbols with a bicycle on the street, which all it says is this is a lane that's a little bit wider, and you should expect bicycle traffic. It's a good first step. It should not be what we aim for, because it is not actually safer for either mode. Sometimes, though, you have to make a compromise. You're not ready to narrow vehicle lanes, you're not ready to do something else. I've recommended them in lots of different places, but I never say this is the perfect solution for your community. This is to get people familiar and get people biking on the streets. The more people bike, the more you'll want to give them. Okay, thank you, everybody.
David will be here for a few more minutes while we are taking our break, so if you have some additional questions for David, please grab him before he has to run out, unfortunately. But we are going to take a 10-minute break right now. There are refreshments out in the hall, and of course restrooms outside as well. We'll be back at 10:10 for the start of our housing panel. See you in a few. And our next session is a panel discussion on housing issues, and in particular issues of downtown housing and mixed-use development. And again, this goes back to the conversations that we've had as we've started work on our urban action agenda with many of the communities that are participating in that effort. You know, getting folks living downtown is something that is very, very important to a lot of places. In Peekskill, where I used to work, you know, we've talked a lot about trying to get more folks come to downtown to support the businesses that are there and the ones that we think might be coming soon. And so I think this topic is one that is very timely, and you'll get to hear from a number of folks that are out doing this work in just a few moments. I want to introduce Mary Payton. She is our moderator for the panel. Mary is Vice President and Mortgage Lender at Community Preservation Corp., a multifamily lending specialist, and since June 2007, she's been in the Hudson Valley office. CPC is a lending leader in financing affordable housing and community development projects in the Hudson Valley. Prior to working at CPC, Mary worked for KeyBank for 9 years as the bank's Vice President of Community Development Lending for the Hudson Valley District. Her primary responsibility includes sourcing and financing housing developments, specializing in affordable housing, developing partnerships for funding with local nonprofit community development agencies, and working with and incorporating the various public funding sources. Mary has over 30 years of banking experience and has spent the past several years responsible for community development lending in the Hudson Valley area. She holds a BBA degree in accounting and finance from Pace University and is a 1999 graduate of the National Community Development Lending School from the University of California at Berkeley. She's also been a good friend of Pattern for Progress and is a graduate of Pattern's Fellows Program, which we're very proud of. So without further ado, I could go, there's a long list of accomplishments I could read, but I think we want to get Mary up here and she can introduce the panel that we've assembled for you today.
Thank you, and I guess that 30 years sort of gave away my age a bit. I think it's probably more than 30, but 30's fine. So thank you all for attending, and let me just give you a little bit of the order. I'll introduce all the speakers in the order of their presentations. After they do their presentations, then I'm going to ask them a couple of questions and sort of guide them a little bit. And then after that, we'll open it up for questions from the audience, okay? So first presenter we'll have is Ken Carney. He's founder and president of Kearney Realty Development Group, a diversified real estate development and property management firm. Ken has nearly 23-year career in real estate development, featuring a string of accomplishments resulting in completed successful projects throughout the Hudson Valley. To date, Kearney Realty has developed commercial, residential, valued at over $100 million, and is currently at some stage of development in an additional $50 million in projects. Known by friends and associates, and myself as well, as a businessman with a big heart, Ken brings experience, tenacity, and strong work ethic and solid professional relationships to all the projects he undertakes. Ken began his development career, and I must say, after he retired as a New York City firefighter, working first in the city of Beacon and the city of Newburgh, renovating historic vacant homes, and then later into the Catskill area as well. Some of the early projects set the tone for the impressive undertakings that have followed since, starting with Garden Street redevelopment project, and that was the first tax credit project that both Ken and I financed. And if you can remember, the old Poughkeepsie Savings Bank at the time was the bank. They no longer exist. He's also done Wynwood Oaks development project, Red Hook Commons, Pendel Commons, the Muse at Baldwin Place, Poughkeepsie Commons, High Ridge Gardens, the Muse at Baldwin Place 2, and now the Hamlet at Pauling. Since 2002, Ken and his development team has developed over 800 units of senior and affordable housing and workforce housing throughout the Hudson Valley. Ken was recognized by Mid-Hudson Patterns for Progress in 2009 for his Hudson Valley Developer of the Year. So Ken will be first. Let me introduce all the speakers. Is that you want? Okay. Okay. The next developer group that we have here is Mark and Bill Fonte. They are owners of Trifont Enterprises. Trifont is an owner-manager developer of real estate developments in the tri-state area. In the last decade, Trifont has been involved with several large-scale developments such as the Renaissance Square, Ritz-Carlton of Westchester, LeConte Square, Thomas Wright Estates, River Park Central, the Yonkers Old Public Library restoration, Yonkers H&I Waterfront development, and the lofts on North Avenue. They provide services that include city and town approvals, construction management, property acquisitions, property management, and negotiation of all agreements with municipalities and the associated entities. Mark holds a BS from business from Iona College and is also a licensed real estate broker. And Bill is an engineer with an engineering degree from the University of Rochester and a master's in engineering and an MBA from MIT. Tom McGrath. Who doesn't know Tom McGrath? Tom McGrath is Senior Vice President and Director of CPC's, Community Preservation's Upstate Revitalization, and has served CPC for nearly 25 years, combining his vision for affordable housing and his knowledge throughout the Hudson Valley. Tom leads efforts to increase CPC's presence in the commitment to the upstate New York. His experience is utilized to mentor field office heads to develop upstate growth strategies and to find unique ways that CPC can enhance its impact on the communities it serves. Prior to this role, Tom oversaw all aspects of community preservation, CPC Resources, which was a CPC's for-profit subsidiary, which was created 20 years ago to provide equity and develop affordable housing to underserved communities in the state. Projects range from the decade-long revitalization of 12,000 plus units at Parkchester Complex in the Bronx to the renovation of new construction of small residential properties in Harlem. Tom also served as Senior Vice President, Director of Investor Relationship, his role there continued by, that's okay. He coordinated 70 prominent banks, insurance companies, and pension funds. Tom, like I said, has served as CPC for over 25 years, and he opened the Hudson Valley office and also was instrumental in the expansion to the eastern, central, and western New York. And last, we have Tim Jones. Tim is a manager of Robert Martin Company and is responsible for executing the company's investment and growth strategy. He also oversees management of existing assets, including land and commercial properties in Florida, California, New York, New Jersey, and Connecticut. Since his return to Robert Martin in 2004, the company has invested in transactions with a retail value in excess of $750 million. Prior to his current position at Robert Martin, he served as president of McCallie Realty, one of the nation's largest real estate investment trusts. He also was the president of Clifton Companies, president of Federated National Companies, and a vice president at Chemical Bank. Tom earned a BA degree from Yale and a master's from Columbia. He is currently chairman of the Westchester Coalition for Business Development and the director of Wynwood School in White Plains. Thank you all for agreeing to participate on the panel. So the first speaker will be Ken Carney.
Good morning. Thank you, Mary. As Mary stated, real estate development was my second career. I used to be a fireman in the South Bronx. I was badly burned in July of 1988, and I was looking for a second career. One of my first phone calls was to CPC and Tom McGrath. They just opened the Westchester office, and we went to Beacon, New York. Beacon was a struggling river city, and there was one other fellow in there before me, and myself and a couple other developers followed, and it got the Beacon Renaissance started. From there, we went over, we did a couple of key properties over in the town of Newburgh and the city of Newburgh. Well, I got away from the revitalization business and went into more new construction. But now after 25 years, it's come full circle, and the focus is back on mixed income, mixed use, downtown revitalization. My son joined the business 5 years ago, have 3 boys. The first 2 escaped. He couldn't, so he's forced to come into the business. And he started telling me years ago, he says, listen, he says, all my friends are moving downtown. He says, they see life different than your generation. And it's the movement. And that synergy with the millennials, in addition to the quote-unquote young seniors who are empty nesters and don't want to be burdened with a house anymore, are moving back to downtown urban areas. And I think that this synergy that exists today only comes about every 50 or 100 years. And the communities that can capture that synergy will do very well. The communities who don't run the risk of remaining stagnant. So with that being said, the first development we decided to take on was in the city of Peekskill. We bought a piece of property downtown. City of Peekskill started probably 25 years ago, and they formed an artist district downtown to create artist lofts above retail stores. There was one remaining piece of property downtown, and we purchased the property. Mike Welty was hired by the city as the planning director, and he gave us a call about a month after we purchased it and said, what are your plans? And so we got together and we talked about the need for density. And in order to make these projects work, you need density, you need numbers, and they have to pencil out. So Mike worked very hard with the Common Council to pass a zoning amendment to allow increased density for the upper floors if one floor contained artist lofts. So what we have proposed is a project with 2 buildings. The first building is on Main Street. We have 4 retail stores. We actually have 5. The middle store is actually the entrance into the building. We've made it look like a storefront. It's going to replicate a storefront, but it's also going to be a quasi-gallery. The first 2 floors of this building are for affordable artist lofts, and the top floor is market rate. The units themselves, we feel, will be very attractive to the millennials. 16-foot high ceilings. They're true lofts. There's a staircase in every unit. We'll keep the ducts exposed, and with the 16-foot high ceilings and very large windows, We feel that this is the model that will work in this location. So the 48 artist lofts, we are seeking some funding. Some of those will have some income restrictions that will go anywhere from 60% of median up to 90% of median income. The other 24 units will be rented at market rate. The commercial, we envision, we're hoping to attract a couple of restaurateurs. What we will do is we recognize that this location is not a quote-unquote A or AA location. So we do our own construction. We have to go the extra mile to make it easy for somebody to make the type of investment that's needed here for a fledgling entrepreneur restaurateur. We will design it keeping in mind, the underground plumbing, the HVAC, the venting for the kitchen equipment and so forth, and try to get it to a point that when you show it to a fledgling restaurateur, they're on second base, headed for third. So it's critical, in my experience, when you're working in an area that's trying to either stabilize or gentrify, that you encourage the ground floor entrepreneurs to be creative and to succeed. And in order to do that, what we try to do is we will not, when we underwrite the project, we will underwrite the commercial way below market. It gives us a great degree of flexibility in hoping to rent to somebody and give them that 3 or 5 years to get their business established. So that's what we seek to do here. In addition to the Main Street building, we have a courtyard, and the courtyard connects to a building on the street behind, which is Diven Street, and that also has 3 floors, 2 floors artist lofts, and 1 floor of market rate housing. In addition, we have a roof deck. The roof deck will be available to all of our tenants and will be available for the commercial tenants probably 2 or 3 times a year for special occasions. We do have a courtyard area between the 2 buildings, which is quite nice, and we expect to open that up 2 or 3 years for the artists who live in the buildings. In addition to the hallway acting as a quasi-gallery, we hope to have shows 2 or 3 times a year in the courtyard for the tenants to showcase their wares. We think that the synergy that exists today in Peekskill, it's well on its way. It's a snowball going downhill. What's been started lately, restaurateur came in. He's opened up 2 or 3 restaurants. They're doing very well. If you walk around Peekskill, it's just, it's got a great vibe, great synergy, and we're very, very happy to be part of that. In addition to that, we've done a lot of work in Poughkeepsie. We love the city of Poughkeepsie. It's in our blood. Sean said to me, he always had his eye on this site. It was called the Sculptor Park, but because we don't want to get involved with SHPO taking over a park, we refer to it as the Sculptor Lot. So if you know Poughkeepsie at all, if you come around behind the Civic Center and Main Street continues down toward the waterfront, you make a right toward the waterfront, down toward the train station, and you go down 1 block. On the left-hand side is a large corner piece, about 8/10 of an acre, and it's on the left-hand side. So Sean's been pestering me for a couple of years. We finally put a proposal together. The city was, they took their time, asked a lot of questions, and they agreed to our proposal. We're going to emulate the Peekskill project. It's going to have 5 storefronts, 5 very large storefronts, and approximately 72 to 73 units with some on-site parking as well. What's neat about this site, well, there's a lot of things that are neat about it, but it wraps around from Main Street to Bridge. And on Bridge, we lowered the Bridge Street by 1 story. So you can walk out of the Main Street building onto a roof deck, and you get to see the bridge at night, and you get to see the walkway at night. It's really special. So again, we hope to open that up a couple times a year to some of the restaurants that we hope to attract on the first floor, and it'll be available to our tenants as well. That will also be mixed income, mixed use. We are going to set aside some units for artists, and we are going to have some units up to 90% of median income, and then some units up to market rate. So we're pretty excited about it. As I stated earlier, I think the opportunity exists. I've also worked in the New York City watershed, if anybody's dealt with that root canal, to go into a municipality with water and sewer at the curb is so attractive to a developer today, and most municipalities are opening their arms and they're working with you, as the city of Peekskill does. The staff there is incredible. Anything they can do to help, and it's just a great experience going back to these communities that want to see their downtowns redone. So it's a tremendous opportunity, and we look forward to working with it. Thanks.
Thank you, Ken. Next up, we have Mark and Bill Fonte.
Good morning. How are you? I want to talk a little bit about our development site in downtown Yonkers that we just finished. We started with an old library building that was a vacant building from the city. The city had moved their old library to a new location, and this building was pretty much empty for 13 years. We came in with a partnership with Yonkers in order to regentrify the area, in order to put work-live lofts above the commercial space, and also in partnership with in this area, TOD area, we had a street that was next door, which was dingy, was not very attractive, and the city had put money into the street in order to regentrify the area, in order to open up the river, the Sawmill River, the daylighting of the Sawmill River, which is right next to this building. And it's 23 units. It's also a lot of stuff that Ken talked about downtown. It's energy. Everybody wants to walk downtown. It's near the train station, this project. And we created loft spaces. We created, some of the units have their own outdoor patio spaces. We have a common area for patio spaces. We have an indoor gym. We have a little rec room. And that really, really brings a lot of the working class people to the area. And really, this project is actually 100% complete. It's fully rented. It's been on board for about a year and a half now. And people love to live in the downtown. We're getting a lot of good people to rent apartments out. And it was in great partnership with the city of Yonkers in order to get this off the ground. It had to be, there was some grant money involved. There was a Restore New York grant that was involved in order to get this back on the tax rolls for the city, in order to bring money into the municipalities also. And we're very happy with the project. We're very happy with working with the city and their input into getting this design and getting this project complete. And this now has also led into a lot more projects now coming to downtown Yonkers. We have bigger projects. Avalon's coming in town. RXR, which is a major developer, they're coming in town, building 400 units 1 block away from it. So this is definitely a halo effect of one little site that was vacant, and now all of a sudden now we have it filled up. We have more people that are coming to the community, more people living there, people walking to the train station. Now people are starting to get this TOD area and regentrification of the downtown, and the restaurants are coming, new shops are coming, new businesses are coming to downtown. It's a process. It takes a little time, but I think that with the city on board helping, it's beautiful. It's going to be a beautiful aspect. Maybe Bill wants to talk a little bit more.
I guess we've done quite a few developments in a lot of municipalities in the lower Westchester area. We found a lot of talented people working with the municipalities that were there to help. Many times the red tape got in the way of getting things done quicker. But you have to be very patient. This project was probably a 6-7 year endeavor from the start to the finish. Our partner was the city, and it was tied together. We had Restore New York grant money to do this, but it was a much bigger project. So we had to work with them hand in hand to get this done. And it's a good example of what a lot of municipalities could do to get buildings back on the tax rolls. This building was sitting idle for 10, 12 years. It actually had been flooded out several times. It's a beautiful building, 1928 heritage. But it needed some help to get it back on the rolls. The total investment for this area was close to $14 million. So that was a big endeavor to try to do that. The good thing with the grant is the project got done, The city is getting full taxes on the project. There wasn't a pilot involved. There was no lessening of the benefits that the city received. We also were successful in getting a national tenant for the first floor, which was Deals. And that helped to kind of create a vibrant downtown, because now you have a national tenant that's open, you know, early in the morning and late at night. A lot of the folks that are in there, that were in there previous, you know, they were regular working owners that basically would close up shop at 5 o'clock and the streets would roll up, and basically the downtown would cease to exist after a certain period. With having a national tenant and having some presence there, we've now allowed the downtown area to grow and prosper, and you're starting to see a lot more investment from other areas. But I guess my advice is the cities have to be patient, developers have to be patient, you have to work together, and you have to have a lot of trust to pull these projects off, because, you know, this was kind of done in the worst of times, right when the economy hit bottom, and we were able to continue the process and get it done, but it took a lot of effort.
Thank you. And I'd like to add that, in particular, sometimes it's easier to get the larger scale projects done than to get these small infill. But if you just build new, larger scale projects, buildings like that beautiful building doesn't get renovated. So these are important projects to the downtowns. Next we have Tom McGrath.
Thanks, Mary. As Mary pointed out earlier, I have been working until very recently with the CPC Resources, which is the for-profit subsidiary of CPC. And under that organization, we created a couple of opportunity funds, or private equity funds, to invest in redevelopment of projects, affordable housing, Main Street revitalizations, and what have you. And the projects I wanted to review today was 2 properties that we developed in Spring Valley, New York. Spring Valley was, like many communities, where it was the hub of the retail shopping, or one of the hubs of retail shopping for Rockland County. And once the malls came in, most of the shopping went towards the malls. Main Street sort of died over the years and ultimately became quite vacant. There are still properties that were occupied, but most of the Main Street section that we redeveloped were vacant. The village was anxious to rebuild their downtown and create development opportunities for new construction, residential housing, and what have you. And they created an urban renewal plan that they had approved at HUD, and a plan around it. And they were looking for developers that would come in and take that risk to get started on it. I'm not sure exactly where we came into that process. I know they had spoken to a lot of developers. I think that the approach that we took was a little bit different, in that we recognized that the village was going to make a huge investment in these development sites. And because of that investment, I think we took a different approach, where we were much more partners with the municipality, with the village. Right up to the point where, well, they had put together opportunities on 7 or 8 development sites within the village. And we did an analysis, albeit some of it back of the envelope, but we did do an analysis on all the development sites and shared them with the village, where we thought the opportunities were, what the impact might be on each one of those sites, which one should come first, and what have you. And ultimately, we decided that the 2 Main Street sites, or 2 properties that faced one another on Main Street, may have the greatest impact in helping to rebuild the downtown, starting with Main Street and trying to make it a more walkable community, invite shoppers to ideally come downtown. We talked about the types of uses that we would want to have downtown, where people would want to shop, to attract more shopping. If people came to our properties, they may shop on others as well. Well, as we started to study those sites, we actually shared our numbers. We started out looking at a market rate scenario, an 80-20 scenario, 80% market, 20% affordable, 60-40, et cetera, et cetera. The one thing that we kept coming back to in Spring Valley, anyway, was that the market rate units were very, very similar to the affordable units. The 60% of median market translated into about $1,200 or so, round numbers, for an apartment on Main Street in Spring Valley. And that was the market. So the idea that we would create affordable housing using various subsidies, I think, was alarming initially to the community. Spring Valley really is one of the most diverse communities that I've ever worked in, and they pride themselves a lot with that diversity and wanted to retain that diversity. And so, you know, they didn't want to have a concentration necessarily of low income right on Main Street, but it was the market. So it provided an opportunity for us to create some affordable housing right downtown, but also provide a lot of the subsidy to help build the project, the two projects. And what we did on one side of the street, we created 53 senior housing, first floor retail. And the site across the street was to be 55 family houses with first floor retail. The family side backs up to a parking lot, and beyond the parking lot is the town park. So we thought it made a lot of sense to have families being able to walk right out the back of the building and directly into the town park, and the seniors across the street. And we broke it up that way, a lot of it having to do with not only the need, but also how financing works. There were various programs that were available for seniors, and there are other programs that are available for families. There are 9% low-income housing tax credits, and there are 4% low-income housing tax credits. We're trying to develop these properties as close together as possible to have the greatest impact. And we didn't really think that we'd be able to go back to the well at the state level or county level or any place like that for two projects at the same time. So if we created them slightly different, we'd be utilizing different sources of funds. And that drove a lot of our decisions with that. But for our financial modeling, for our architectural plans, including you know, in the corners of the building, you can see at the far end of the corner, those are the corners that traffic would see. We tried to have a nice impact as one drove down the street. The buildings are set back off the sidewalk a little bit further from when they used to be, so that the sidewalks were a little bit wider, but still out to the curb. We created at the corners, you probably can't see on the sidewalks, to make it a shorter crosswalk for seniors and what have you. And I think that the village officials were very pleased with the plan. As part of the urban renewal, the village, I think we're going to talk about financing later, but I'll just touch on the fact that the village, their huge investment in this was the fact that they were putting together a bond financing to acquire the properties under urban renewal. So since they were really well vested in this property, in both of these properties, they really wanted to be part of the process. And they really were. When issues came up, they heard us. I think we created a trust between us because we actually shared our numbers and our development costs and what have you. And when we hit a hurdle, they were part of the decision-making process on how we would make changes. This was at a time when construction costs were rising. So as the process progressed, costs were rising, so we kept having to go back and figure out other ways to make it work. But at the end of the day, we completed the projects. They're fully occupied from the residential standpoint. One side of the street, the retail, is fully occupied. The other side is not, but I think we're going to talk a little bit about mistakes that might have been made a little bit further on. But they operate well, and they're fully occupied residentially most of the time. That's a quick background on our properties.
Thank you, Tom. And for cleanup, we have Tim Jones.
Hi. Robert Martin Company was founded by Robert Weinberg and Martin Berger in the late 1950s. And since that time, we've developed somewhere between 10 and 20 million square feet of properties. the bulk of that in the mid-Hudson Valley, and the bulk of that really in Westchester. We've developed almost everything, and one of the advantages of developing that long and that many product types is you make a lot of mistakes. And so we try to learn from those mistakes, and something we've learned is that when we're evaluating what kind of developments to do, we really try to look out and look at kind of the big trends. Some of those were alluded to earlier. I'd say demographics today really drives things largely, particularly the large segment of the population that's in the millennials, as everyone refers to them. I call them the echo boomers and the baby boomers. And another big trend today is the effect of the internet on jobs, particularly the way it's eviscerated middle management and impacted the office market, and the way it's affecting retail. I mean, if you look at the kind of the developments here and the things people talk about in retail, the nature of retail tenancy has changed enormously. Everything today tends to be around service. There's very few soft goods, things that people can buy on the internet. They buy on the internet, and it's very hard for retailers to make sense. So as we're looking at projects, we try to keep those things in mind. The other thing that we keep in mind is how to finance things. I think we're going to talk about that later on. So today we've got about, I don't know exactly, maybe 10 or 12 projects that we're working on in this market. A number of those are downtown. We've got a couple things in downtown White Plains that we think have got a lot of potential. A project that we're also very excited about, but is in early stages, so I didn't present it today, is in Brewster, New York, which would be more classic TOD. Covington has been designated as the downtown redeveloper there, and we're working closely with them in partnership with them. Today, the project I present is in downtown Elmsford. And Elmsford, for those of you who don't know it, in Westchester County is a village located kind of between, it's got both 287 and 119 access and 9A access. Got a large industrial base and commercial base, and kind of moderate level housing. This site is on the Sawmill River Road. The arrows you see up in the lower right-hand corner are an exit and access onto Sawmill River Road. This was the location for many years of a catering hall called Anton's. Although this is probably 3 blocks away from the existing downtown in Elmsford, the village sees it as a way to open up development for some undeveloped property, or some I guess not undeveloped, but less developed property to the south, which would be to the left on this slide. And they worked with us very closely to get this done. To get this project off the ground, one of the things we had to do is the parking lot at the top of the property was actually a road, which was an access road that allowed was kind of backdoor access for 400 apartments immediately above this project. And the property down the south, or on the bottom of the screen, is owned by us. And so what the village did was they demapped this upper tier, and we swapped them, or we will swap them, that property for the property down below, and then we will build this road, which will allow access to the properties to the south of our site. The project will develop with, it's about 111,000 square feet. I don't know if you flip to the next slide. 111,000 feet. If you can see the ground floor, this is standing on Valley Road, which is the road we'll be building, looking at the property. There will be retail on the first floor. We actually put some parking at the end. This is an older rendering. And then residential, it's built into a hill, so we'll access the residential on the upper part of the property. If you went back to the site plan, one of the debates we're having right now, we're still designing the final building. Debates we're having is where to locate the entrances to encourage people to use the parking on the north side of the property. There's about 12,000 feet of retail with very shallow depths, about 65 feet. And it's designed for convenience. I mean, we think the zoning is flexible. The town actually modified the zoning code, the village modified the zoning code for us to allow service, office service, medical, and convenience. And the village also recognized that mixed use, that there would be some shared parking in mixed use, although retail and residential are not ideal partners in mixed use, but we got some shared parking, so we were able to reduce the parking slightly. So that's the project.
Thank you. So since I'm a lender, the next thing we're going to talk about is financing. So I'd like to ask the panel if they could give us an idea of how the projects were financed, what financing incentives we're giving, any special other financing tools. We'll start with you, Ken.
The model that we used on the first project in Beacon, although it was a very small project, only 12 units back 25 years ago, is the same model or percentages that we're using today. There were 12 units. I think we made 4 or 5 of the 12 units affordable. We were able to access some funds for those affordable units, and then also access some grants through the Federal Home Loan Bank, through CPC, and it was able to close a funding gap. On the Peekskill project and on the Poughkeepsie project, we envision using bond financing. In addition, we hope to get some tax credits on the affordable artist loss. In addition, we may be enrolled in one of the sites. We may be enrolled in the Brownfield program, which would present an opportunity for Brownfield tax credits. When in Poughkeepsie is a little different than Peekskill because the rental market isn't as strong. The further south you go down into Westchester, the rental market is better, stronger, hotter, if you will, and the rents are doing very well, and they continue to climb. So as the rents climb, you can carry more private debt. When you get outside of those high rent areas, you have to be creative, and that's what we're trying to do in both the Peekskill and the Poughkeepsie project. So if you incorporate a component of mixed income, you hope to capture some tax credits and turn that into equity and lower your borrowing cost.
Thank you. And I believe that you mentioned Restore, Bill and Mark Ponte?
On the Yonkers project, we had a Restore New York grant, and then the rest was self-financed. On our New Rochelle project, we've gotten smarter, and we've gotten a loan from CPC to do that project.
Since when is lender a loan smarter, but good?
Much smarter. Trust me, self-financing was very difficult, but under the circumstances and the environment and banking at that point, nobody was lending. So that was the only avenue we had. So it was a very hard lift. But you know, traditionally, you know, we've looked at all aspects. We have another site which we have brownfield credits for that help quite a bit to offset some of the development costs. We've done several projects with pilots, you know, payments in lieu of taxes. Some municipalities have made those available to help you kind of get the project up rented, and running. And then there's various other, we've applied for the regional council several times as priority projects to get grants to do some of the auxiliary things like park development around our sites. And we've also worked with the municipalities to try to develop some additional amenities for the area, walking trails and access to parklands and bus systems and transit systems in the area. So that basically summarizes what we've done.
Thanks. And Tom?
In Spring Valley, as I mentioned before, the village itself had a huge investment in that they floated a bond to acquire the properties through urban renewal. We wound up reimbursing some of those costs, but not all. So that was a huge investment on their part, and sort of different in this normal, in this lending environment. We also used the low-income housing tax credits for both properties. One side of the street were 9%. Just to visit that rent issue again, our rents are actually on the senior site a little bit lower than the allowable rents under the tax credit program. And the reason that they're lower is that that's the market. We can't get any more rent than that. I think we're around $900 for the senior units, and the market just doesn't allow us to go any higher than that. and the same with the family side of the street. So the term of low-income housing tax credits is a little bit scary, but it's, you know, in many communities it is market. We also had bond financing. We used the Restore New York funds. The village was the applicant on that. Federal Home Loan Bank, and we had from the state Homes for Working Families from HCR, and also the New York State Housing Trust Fund. So we really layered in lots of different types of financing, along with private debt as well. So it was a complicated financing process, but the village, as I said, was very much a part of it.
And I'd just like to add that Rockland Housing Action Coalition was a partner in the development of those Spring Valley sites, and it's always important to have that local nonprofit. Tim?
Yeah, we tend to do predominantly commercial financing with commercial lenders, and we get help in paying for non-income producing aspects of property from the government entities. In this case, we got an IDA inducement, which was helpful. We also had I don't know if you call it a federal subsidy, in that we had a piece of land we sold, and so we did a 1031. And so the land we looked at is less expensive for us. That helped make the project work. This location, we see this as workforce housing, and design of the unit because of the narrowness of the site. We're going to end up with a number of smaller units, particularly studios, which don't exist in the market, so we're very comfortable with the demand. One of the difficulties we've run into recently, which people probably encountered, is the impact of, I guess it's Basel III on equity requirements for projects. I guess there's much more cash equity required if you're going to do commercial bank financing today, but that's how we're doing this project.
And I'd just like to mention a couple of other financing tools that I've seen work. As both Tom and Ken alluded to, the 9% are a very competitive process, but there are some things at the municipal level that you can do. IDA sale leasebacks are really good options. They come with mortgage tax and sales tax exemption, which really helps and encourages the developers. And it's not competitive, and municipalities, some of you who have IDAs, have the ability to use those incentives. Also, I'd like to suggest one of the biggest incentives, and again, this is from a dollars and cents point of view. You have so much income, you have expenses, you have net income. That's what you can use to float debt. That's it. So to the extent that you can lower your expenses, again, municipalities have the ability, particularly when you're working in, sort of urban areas, trying to redevelop and bring them back, some tax incentives. And I know that's a scary thought. Everybody wants, or the municipalities want to count every tax dollar now. But don't just think about today, think about the future. If you encourage projects by allowing them either a tax pilot or 485A, 485B, 581A, those are tax incentives built into the real estate tax code that municipalities can use to help encourage redevelopment efforts. In the short term, yes, you're getting a little bit more taxes, but don't think short term, think long term. You're going to have a vibrant new community, and eventually they will catch up and pay full taxes. So that's just a comment from me. Second question I'd like to ask the panel, is there experience in working with the local municipalities? Give us some of the pitfalls. If you want, give us the benefit of your knowledge and your experience in helping other developers and municipalities that are here today.
Well, it's the title from the book. It was A Tale of Two Cities. It was the best of times. It was the worst of times. It depends what municipalities you go into. We go into meetings. We'll look at sites, and we'll have a round table with some of the local officials, and you get a sense. You get a sense if the political will is there to make changes, either to increase density or changes that have to be incorporated into the development plan in order to make it successful. I mentioned Peekskill. Peekskill, we didn't even own the property for less than 30 days, and they called us in and said, what is your vision here, and what do you need us to do in order to help you get there? That's a proactive approach. It didn't end there. From Mike and Anthony Ruggiero's here, Gene is here, the city planner. It didn't end there. I was on the phone yesterday with the city of Peekskill. We're still going through the approval process, and we're working through all the different issues that come with developing a high-density site downtown. But it's a proactive approach. The will is there to get it done. The city of Poughkeepsie as well, we've worked with them on a couple of creative supportive housing developments. They've actually given pilots. We've gone into the city and said, listen, there's a law on the books, 581A, that says you can only assess property with an affordable component according to its deed restrictions. So we go in, we run an analysis and said, listen, this property can only be assessed for approximately, let's say, $80,000 or $90,000 anyway. Let's not fight every year over an assessment. Let's agree to some kind of structured tax agreement. The planning department, the city of Poughkeepsie, we just go into contract 6 weeks ago. I want to get an application in October. I need to show some progress on the planning board. So, I called the planner up and I said, when was your submission date? He said, last week. I said, okay. Can I get on the agenda? He said it was last week. I said, okay, can I get on the agenda? We got on the agenda last week, and it went very well. And it's now started the process. And again, the planner bent over backwards. The city bends over backwards to work with you. This is a very risky business we're in. It's a very rewarding business on a lot of different levels, but it's a very risky business. And as a developer, when you go into an area and you assess that risk-reward, a lot of it is based on the feel or the synergy that exists in the local municipality. We've worked in some municipalities in the worst of times where it just hasn't been there. I own property in a place that shall remain nameless that I've owned it for 14 years. They're tired of talking to me, so what we've done is we've infiltrated them. My son has moved in, and we're setting up a cell as. And they don't want to deal with me anymore. They're going to deal with my son. So I think we'll be successful there. Just kidding. Thanks.
Bill and Mark.
I think it's very important, like what Ken said, is the partnership with the city and really working together. And a lot of, for talking about working with the city, it's very important to obviously have an outline and actually stay with an outline and try to get to the finish line. A lot of these, sometimes you get started with the city and they get lost in the middle, and we can't get the project underway because we're bogged down with red tape. And one of the main things which sometimes the city doesn't understand is time is money. Like Ken said, if you sit there with municipalities so long, it just eats up the bottom line. You can't get the project started. And also, when the time is there, you have to act quickly. I mean, the financing in 2007 dried up, and some of the projects that we were working on died on the vine. But if we would have been approved the year before, we probably would have been in the ground, we would have been financed, and the project would have been done by now. So it's really a partnership with the municipalities and trying to get through the red tape and working together in partnership and working before the planning meeting with the town officials, sitting down with them, trying to work out all the kinks before you get to a meeting which meets once a month and you're stuck in the mud, so to speak, at that meeting. Work it out beforehand. Sit down with the planner. Go in there with meetings. Bring the architect in. We've done all that in order to work through the agendas. Bring the building inspector in. Bring the local fire department in. Work out all the code issues ahead of time. That way, when you go into a official meeting, it's productive. And instead of 3 or 4 meetings, it's 1 or 2 meetings you get approved. So that's my advice.
Thank you.
I agree with that. Having everyone involved early is key. I already mentioned that we've had a great partnership with the village, and they prioritized our applications, meetings, et cetera. So from that standpoint, and once we agreed on a plan that we were moving forward with, the zoning was sort of written around that plan, so it was actually written after the fact. Where we ran into a problem is that it takes a while to get through that process anyway, but once we got through, we were also building affordable housing, and then we had to coordinate the timing of the financing and the subsidies with the state. So we had a project that was ready to build, but we were waiting for the state subsidies to come through, and that created some tension because the village was a great partner with us and expected us to be able to start immediately, but we didn't have the dollars in place, and the state likes to finance projects that are ready to start. construction. So it's to line up all that timing is a little bit difficult. We wound up getting there, but it wasn't without a few moments of some tension.
Yeah, because we've been around for so long, and we often own land in municipalities for many years before it's developed. We've seen the roller coaster of encouraging and discouraging municipalities. I would say today, in general, there's a very positive attitude in many municipalities, and we try to choose when we go into a new market. We clearly evaluate very carefully kind of the working relationship we can have with the municipality. And New York is very difficult. SECRA is very difficult because it really allows people who oppose developments to hold them up for a long period of time, particularly if there isn't political will by the by the decision makers. Again, today we're working in a number of cities. In fact, we're in villages and towns. Some of them have been very difficult in prior years, but with the current administration, and I guess the understanding that you have to work together, particularly if you want to attract jobs. It's a very good time to develop, and I think there's an opportunity today because of the demand for housing created by the millennials and the empty nesters and low interest rates. There are conditions that exist that will change. They'll change whether it's next year or 5 years from now. And if you don't take advantage of those opportunities today, you may not have them in the future. And we need to work hard in New York State, particularly because we don't have the land. We have a very high cost of living, and everybody has to be on the same team, or we won't get things done.
Thank you. And just a follow-up question, Ken, because I know you've done a lot in urban areas as well as suburban areas. Is there a difference? Is there a NIMBY difference, urban areas? Is there a versus? and if you wouldn't mind commenting on that.
I was prepared for everything but that.
That was a surprise question.
When you get into the outside the urban areas, as Tim alluded to, the SECRA process. The SECRA process, who was it, Roberta Flack, that said, "Kill me softly with your song." It's killing me softly with the SECRA process. It's death by 1,000 cuts when they want to. And it's really driven, a lot of times it's driven by the NIMBYs. We have been embroiled in NIMBY fights going back to Wynwood Oaks in Yorktown. Wynwood Oaks, an 80-unit senior project. A group got energized there and thought the world was going to come to an end, filed lawsuits against me all the way through and this and that. They were holding placards up in front of my kids' school. My kids came home, got off the school bus and said, "Hey, Daddy, what is a ghettoizer?" I said, "What? How the people calling you a ghettoizer?" And so we prevailed through the litigation. The young lady who headed the litigation, it's a true story, the day we broke ground, we're unloading our backhoe, she stops traffic on the street and says, Ken, I got to talk to you." I said, "No, I can't talk to you." "No, I got to talk to you for 1 minute." She comes running across the street, across traffic, and goes, "My aunt needs an apartment." It's a true story. The aunt presently is still on the waiting list after 13 years. She's still working her way down the list. But we were recently embroiled with in a couple other areas. We are presently in federal court in a community right outside Albany. I've been in federal court twice in the last 18 months. Both times the municipality settled. I don't want to go into details. Both municipalities were very gracious in settling the dispute. It was unfortunate it had to get to that point, but it was 2 times where we were actually invited into the community, and then the winds changed, so they changed the zoning on us, and that's not fair. So yes, you don't expect to get that in the urban areas, and as a developer, it's so attractive to go into an urban area and know that the SECRA process, you don't get involved in a lot of the New York City watershed issues that I alluded to before, and a lot of the NIMBY issues.
Do I have time for more questions, or should we take questions from the? Okay. So I thought I'd also like to talk about zoning, inclusionary zoning, density bonuses, things of that nature. if you have any experience with those and how they helped your project. Mark and Bill?
I guess my advice with that is to follow through. We've had many situations where towns have spent a great deal of money on studies. With the studies coming out with proposed zoning for areas, but many times that's where it stops, and it doesn't get turned into actual zoning zones like you, for example, like you have in New York City, where you know where you can build the day you set sites on a site. So anything the municipalities can do to put the zoning that they want built in certain areas as part of the legislative, so that developers can come in and back of envelope calculate how many units they can build without having to go through endless seeker, zoning, planning board approvals that just, you know, make those bonuses not even worthwhile pursuing.
Thank you. Tim?
Yeah, I would just say that I think it's important to be able to allow the appropriate density on a site. There are very few markets, you know, north of New York City today that will support housing construction above 4-story frame. And so having density bonuses and, you know, inclusionary zoning doesn't matter unless it's bringing you to kind of that fully developed site with that kind of construction.
Tom, do you have a comment or two?
No, I basically agree with everyone, but I do think somebody made the comment to follow through. So if there are density bonuses in place, or if there are any kind of incentives, that's what developers are looking for. Ken mentioned sewer and water before. I live in Westchester County. We're always trying to create affordable housing in the town that I live in, but we're all on septic. And so it's really, really tough to create any kind of density on the septics that we have. But in the areas that we actually have zoning and we try to pursue, it's still a problem. There are opportunities for changing of that zoning and what have you. So follow through would be my suggestion.
Great, thanks. So I think we'll open it up for questions from the audience at this point. So, yes.
This may be a little beneath you, so to speak, without being insulting to my question. But we're from a small community upstate New York, Ellenville. We've got about 4,000 or 5,000 people in the village, about 12,000 or 13,000 in the town. We've had a number of industrial issues. Our downtown area is suffering like most small communities, but we've seen some revitalization. We have a theater in the downtown, 4 or 5 restaurants have opened up. We're getting a lot of traffic from out of town. And so as a community, we're looking at the next step. So one of the things we really feel we need, for example, is a motel in our downtown area to help service the theater and the restaurant. How do we encourage people like yourselves to take a look at a community like Ellenville?
Well, there's a very friendly board.
I think one thing that would get developers' attention would be site and site control at a reasonable cost, and knowing that you have a site that's defined. The site fits not only your vision but the developer's vision, and with a cooperative board, there's a path to the end zone, as they call it. And so I think the first thing is identify a site with a plan. If you don't own it, a plan to be able to get site control, and you're halfway home.
I also would say, you know, it's making the, and I think those comments are exactly right, but I think you want to figure out how to go find I mean, hotel developers are a very particular breed. They're you know, you don't, like we've developed almost everything except hospital. We did one hotel, is the worst deal we ever did. And, you know, we haven't done a hospital, well, actually we did do a hospital, and so I think what you want to do is figure out how to market, figure out, you know, how to market it, whether you hire a consultant to do that, or you just look around at similar communities and what hotels have gone there and who the developers are. But if you figure out a proactive way to go find them, we sell hotel sites all the time because we don't do them. And you know, there are you know, there are a number of people who are just doing that kind of business. And probably in a place like Ellenville, there are a number of people who are doing communities of that size.
I saw another question, yes.
This is for Tom, I think. And the financing that Spring Valley kept on their own, what was the net income that they used? What were the sources of the net income that they used to pay down the financing, pay the debt service? And
on the bond?
Yeah, and in a related area, is that spillover and rateables? Can anybody estimate the spillover on other rateables that from the new developed properties?
No, that's why I suggested it was a huge investment on behalf of the village. They felt that their municipality was declining, continuing to decline, and they wanted to take a proactive step. They had a referendum to sell a bond that was $5 million, and I think of that amount of money, we wound up acquiring the sites, I'm forgetting the numbers right now, but somewhere around $1 million that I'm not sure went directly to pay down the bond. So it was taxpayer money that was actually servicing the $5 million bond. So it's not a sharing of cash flow from our properties or anything like that. It's a taxpayer-driven bond.
So then what was the net change in the rateables in the village that would support the debt service?
That I'm not sure of. I mean, it was a big investment on behalf of the property owners in the town, but I don't think at the end of the day it was a significant, I mean, the voters ultimately voted on it in favor of it. So I don't think it was a significant hit to each homeowner. They also have a lot of multifamily properties in Spring Valley, so it was a little bit dispersed. I'm not sure that the residents would feel it as much, but that's a good question. I haven't really finalized that answer.
Yes.
On the Yonkers project, you mentioned 23 units. Was there an affordable component to that?
No. It was all the units were live work.
Yeah, Restore New York doesn't come with income restrictions. It's a really nice tool for the cities to use. Unfortunately, I don't know if it's funded this round, so.
Yeah,
but it was a great tool.
Yeah, they are.
Oh, they are funded? Okay, good. Yes.
Ken, your project in Peekskill, you mentioned that the artist units were affordable. Is it, and you had market rate apartments above?
Yes. We may have to, what is your question?
Well, are we are developers mixing market rate and affordable housing? Let's use that.
Absolutely.
Yeah, absolutely.
Absolutely. We've been doing it since, I've been doing it since I started. There's another building, if anybody is from the Newburgh area, right out in the city and the town, as you make a left, there used to be a law firm there on the corner of 9W, Finkelstein's law firm. You make a left, up on the left there's a beautiful brick Victorian. It was a foreclosure. I bought it in 1993, and it had a store downstairs, and there were 4 apartments upstairs. And I'm sorry, there were 8 apartments, and we made 4 out of the 8 apartments affordable for 15 years. The 15-year affordability is now up. It's now all market. In Beacon, as I stated, a number of those apartments were affordable. It does work. It's hands-on management style to make it work. That's what we do. We pride ourselves in that. Myself and my son still interview every tenant before they move in, and it can work with the right project and the right management style. But yes, we will have, in the Peekskill project, you will have, but the affordable units will be affordable certified artist loft units, similar to some of the other artist lofts they presently have.
And there are many examples of, well, there's specific programs set by the Housing Finance Agency that do 80-20 or 60-40. So 20% affordable, 80% market, 60% affordable, 40% market. But the municipalities, many of them, particularly in Westchester as a result of the HUD lawsuit, have inclusionary zonings and require 10% or more of affordable housing in any new development. And we see that, actually we're doing a little bit of, we have an intern doing a study now, we see that gradually catching on to other communities. There's many in Dutchess County. I know Beacon has inclusionary, town of Fishkill has inclusionary, City of Poughkeepsie is considering inclusionary zoning. So I think it's a model that's going to sustain itself in the future. You know, having pockets of, you know, low-income housing or poverty, we realize probably won't sustain a community. You're better with a blended income community, much like we used to have in the past. So, one more question? Okay, Bob. You're
okay, just based on what you said. With the Spring Valley project, would you, except for the requirements of funding, would you have built it that way with restricted use on both sides?
If the numbers worked, so to speak.
Well, basically, it was dictated that you would have all seniors age
No,
restricted on one side.
No, we did that. We worked with the community to do that, but it was really a little bit more targeted towards the financing. There's a school of thought that we really shouldn't have a lot of children living right on Main Street and coming down, and an elevator going right onto Main Street. So that's why I mentioned the park behind it. It worked out perfectly. The elevator comes right down to the ground floor. They can walk right out to the park on one side, and then the seniors on the other. But no, that was the reason that we actually added the seniors, and we provided an opportunity for some funding in that direction. And the opposite is true. Plus, we had two family sites. We'd be reaching back to the same source of funding for two projects at one time, which is difficult to get.
And seniors like to be in the downtown. They want to walk to the coffee shop. They want to walk to services. You know, they, as they age, don't have the luxury of being able to use cars. Are we out of time? Okay. So thank you all for attending. The speakers will be around a little bit if you want to get them, corner them for additional questions. Thank you.
For him. Okay, put it underneath for him. Okay, so good morning. I am Jonathan Drapkin. I'm the president and CEO of Hudson Valley Pattern for Progress. It's better than what I normally see. Why did we try to get the former mayor of Pittsburgh, to come here for a discussion about an urban action agenda? And I was just talking to Tom, and I said, look, you know, I guess my early exposure, I was a Steelers fan, you know, in the Steel Curtain, and it's a city that took pride in its grittiness. It took pride in its, you know, it was a steel city. It took pride in this. And then the population, starting in the 50s, went from, you know, a relative peak of about 670, I'm sure Tom will correct me, to 305. So even where's Jeff? Even Ellenville went from 6 to 4. I mean, right, roughly, you know. And so I was talking to Tom. It's about perspective, leadership, and culture, but it doesn't really matter the size. It's like when I moved from New York City, and Times Square was a place you wouldn't walk in, to a place where you may not like exactly what they did with it, but people walk in Times Square today. In Manhattan, I moved to Sullivan County. And it's about trying to change a culture. And Tom and I were talking about that. But movie after movie, you know, portray Pittsburgh as this tough, you know, city. And if some of the movies, you'll see large swaths of vacant area. I'll never pronounce it right, the Monongahela. Not bad, okay. River, I mean, things were growing out of the river. I mean, it was, you know, but it needed to be cleaned up. The whole image had to be changed. I had an employee when I worked at the Gehry Foundation who was leaving to go get a new job, and although she changed her mind, she wanted to go to Pittsburgh. And that was the first thing that alerted me to say, why would a 20-something say, I'm going to Pittsburgh? Well, go from that level to the G8, which became the G20, which was the largest industrialized nations in the world, decide to hold their meeting in 2009, I think, roughly, in Pittsburgh. So that gets my attention, too, to say, what happened there that was so unusual from a city that was so near the bottom in its decline starting in the 50s, to where it became this place that people talk about today and use things like, hey, Pittsburgh, it's really cool. Hey, Pittsburgh is a place you really want to live. And millennials, or that 18 to 34-year-old group, are talking about it. How does that happen? And I use Pittsburgh all the time. I used to use it in contrast often to Buffalo to say, but why can Pittsburgh do this, but Buffalo, which roughly had the same demographics, is still struggling to find their way? I know the governor has said the Buffalo Billion, and it's all, but I just was in Buffalo, and I'll take Pittsburgh right now to Buffalo at the moment. But so with that, Tom Murphy, former mayor of Pittsburgh, from 1994 to 2006, currently a senior fellow at the Urban Land Institute, born in Pittsburgh, son of a steelworker, returned to Pittsburgh and became a community organizer on the north side prior to entering politics. There's a long list of things he did: initiated public partnership strategies that leveraged $4.5 billion in economic development, secured another $1 billion in funding for the development of Heinz Field, PNC Park, and a new convention center. His leadership brought about a building boom in Pittsburgh dubbed Renaissance 3. Oversaw a transformation of more than 1,000 acres of blighted, abandoned industrial land into new commercial, residential, retail, and public uses, kind of the things you just saw on the last panel. Led the development of more than 25 miles of new riverfront trails and urban green space, so that mixture of what people are looking for today. And so with that, it's my pleasure to introduce Tom Murphy, former mayor of Pittsburgh.
Thank you. I'm delighted to be here and really honored. How many of you are elected officials? So by the way, there's life after politics, but being mayor of Pittsburgh was the best job in America, I felt, but after 12 years, you're sort of worn out. You don't want to hear it anymore, right? If any of you have been in politics that long, you know that. Since leaving as mayor, I've had an opportunity to work with the Urban Land Institute, which is an organization of 40,000 people from around the world who care about what the quality of development in cities. It's not a lobbying group. It is a think tank in real estate, publishes information, gives out awards, and wants cities to succeed. And in the last 10 months, I've been to 51 cities, from Hong Kong to Atlantic City, and Toledo to Vancouver. And what I've learned are that in every city, regardless of where I've been, there are two big issues that everyone is struggling with. What do you think they are? Environmental issues? Well, almost. Every city is trying to figure out their place in the world. It is a struggle going on all over the world, and I want to, and so there. For me, it is about cities that make a choice. This is a series of choices. You can sort of stay where you are. Maybe you're somewhat comfortable, or you can be very intentional about what you want to do and where you want to take your city and your community. And there is a guy named Horatio Nelson Jackson that epitomizes that story. How many of you have ever heard of Horatio Nelson Jackson? I'm impressed. You saw the documentary. So there are three people here that know American history because he changed your life. and I'm going to tell you the story. Horatio was a doctor in Vermont. Can you all hear me if I walk away from the microphone? Horatio was a doctor, and he was in California at a medical convention with a group of other doctors, and they were debating the impact of the automobile on American society. And all those doctors, as smart as they were, thought it was really going to be a toy for the rich, was not going to have much impact. And Horatio believed it was going to be a game changer, and he bet them all $50 he could drive across the United States in 90 days. And they all laughed and took the bet. And the very next day, Horatio went out and bought his first car. He convinced the young mechanic, Sewall Crocker, to go with him, and they bought a dog named Bud that day for whatever reasons. And the very next day, with no plan and no support or maps, they're on the road driving across the United States. It was 1903. And in 1903, there were 8,000 cars in America, 150 miles of paved road, and no highway department in any state. 55 days later, 63 days later, excuse me, Horatio Sewall and Bud drove down Fifth Avenue in New York City. They somewhere up here across the Hudson River. They might have gone through Newburgh, maybe. And they drove down the Fifth Avenue in New York City in 63 days. They were the first people and dog to drive across the United States. That was in 1903. By 1923, there were 10 million cars in the United States, hundreds of thousands of miles of paved road, and a highway department in every state. Society as we knew it changed completely in those 20 years. And when you're talking about the Hudson Valley, you're talking about the next 20 years. Where you're going to be, and whether you're going to make the right choices to be intentionally, to be somewhere, or not to be anywhere, to be sort of stuck in the mud, because staying where you are is not an answer. And we are living where Horatio Nelson Jackson was, at a moment in time where the world is getting changed enormously. Globalization, you see it. New York City is going to spend $1.5 billion to raise the bridge up when the Panama Canal expands later this year and next year. But there are 16 other ports along the East Coast and the Gulf that are spending in excess of $500 million to compete for that Panama traffic coming. It is impacting not only the ports, but the whole infrastructure of the eastern United States. The roads, the rail, are all being changed by globalization and how that stuff moves. In environmental issues, in the severe weather we're having, whether you believe in climate change or not, get over it. It is having huge impacts on the choices we are making as a community, about how we zone, about how we build not too close or not too far away from the coast in the water. It is having big impacts on choices we are making as a community. Innovation, I don't need to talk about that. You know, when Horatio Nelson Jackson started his road trip, there were 55,000 harness makers in America, and they felt very secure in their job. By 1923, there were 2,500 harness makers in America. Their jobs were wiped out. What is happening today? If you're in the newspaper business, anybody in the newspaper business, you're not quite sure whether you're going to have a job. Amazon is changing the nature of how we buy stuff. How books are printed are being changed. The whole world is changing because of innovation. The 3D printing, I was just hearing about a bridge being built with 3D printing in Amsterdam now. Literally building a bridge on site with 3D printing. Who could have imagined? In 5 years, are you ready for driverless cars? So I can call Uber up and a car will come and get me and nobody will be driving it. It will take me where I want to go. You're laughing? It's happening. We are living in an unprecedented moment of change. And demographics, I'll talk about all this, and competing for talent, and how do you pay for the infrastructure you need to compete in a new world. I was just with the mayor of Wilson, North Carolina. Anybody here ever hear of Wilson, North Carolina? You know what, you heard of Wilson, North? You know what they did? They have the fastest broadband in the country. They made a decision as a city, a small town, 50 miles outside of Charlotte, that they're going to create a competitive advantage themselves by having a super fast broadband. and they invested in that. And then there was a guy that made these big whirligigs there, and he died, but they gathered all these whirligigs up, and so they are merging technology and arts to sort of make their place in the world in a very creative way. And so look at the employment trends. These are employment trends of cities all across America. If you look at manufacturing, you can see most cities have lost anywhere from 30% to 50% of their manufacturing jobs in the last 20 years. In the last 20 years. And if you look on the other end, you can see that in many cases, when there were more manufacturing jobs in 1990 in many of these cities, now there are 2 or 3 times more people working in technical jobs, education, universities, and research than there were in 1990. If that's the trend, not to say we're not going to have manufacturing, but manufacturing is looking very different because of technology. If that's the trend, what's the single most important competitive advantage you can have as a community to compete in that? Education. It is about talent. It's about how you grow talent and how you attract talent to your community. That is the raw material of the future. It's not coal. It's not the stuff in the ground anymore. It's the stuff in the head that is driving the economies of America. And increasingly, our success as a country is our ability to innovate and how we commercialize that innovation. I mentioned demographics. How many of you get AARP magazine? Go ahead, give it up. It was tough when I turned 50 to apply. I waited until I was 55 before I took that discount, right? But if you read AARP magazine, for those of you that are younger, you know almost every month there's an article in there about the best places to live in America. And boomers are not looking for as much anymore the acre and the 5-bedroom house in the suburbs. Many of us now are looking for walkable places where we can live in a comfortable place that's affordable, that has maybe good educational opportunities, that I can take some courses, culture, arts, good restaurants, maybe places to hike and walk. So if you read the AARP magazine, they really talk about the most livable places in America virtually every month. Even more powerful are young people. How many of you are millennials between the 18 and 35? So you are changing the world. None of us who have gray hair know what Uber is, right? But you are, and one of the most telling measures of the millennials is that at a 24-year-old is 6 times less likely to own an automobile than their parents at that age. That's a General Motors survey. And General Motors and the car companies are worried because for those of us who grew up in the 60s and the 70s, the cars were your symbol of success, right? I mean, what car you had was what you had. And now for kids, cars are not important. They are interested in mobility. And so you have in many cities Zip Cars to Go or Zipcar, where I can get a car, or Uber comes to my door when I call up and picks me up. And in now cities in Washington, D.C., there are 23,000 bicycles all over the street in bike share. And most major cities now have bike share programs where you can go pick a bike up and ride that last mile after you get off the subway and then leave it right there. And so there is a whole new transportation and mobility system being built in many places around the country, largely driven by the millennials. And there's a big debate whether when they start to have kids, are they going to start moving back to the more traditional. And I think that the jury's still out of whether that will be the case. So you all hear it, and I all hear it all the time, is government just needs to get out of the way, right? And everything will be fine. And I want to talk about that because I believe it is the opposite. I think in the 21st century, cities that are going to be successful are going to be cities that are, one, well managed. If you're not safe and clean, nothing else as good is going to happen. You need to be in control of crime, and you need to be a safe place, and you need to be a clean place. If I drive into a city and I see litter everywhere and lots of graffiti all over the place, it's not a place that is a very inviting place. And so it's about vibrant. In my mind, it is about how do you create great places that people want to be. You know, you have the Hudson Valley is an incredibly beautiful place with lots of great natural infrastructure. How do you build on that? You're not near the ocean. You don't have warm climate here, right? So, but you have other remarkable assets. Pittsburgh was the same way. And how do you build on those assets? What are they? How do you focus on them and build on them? Whether it is bike trails or hiking opportunities or building great little towns with culture and the arts, using all those our talents and the authenticity. I mean, you have an incredible history here. In buildings and in the history of the place, and how do you build on all that? We talked about talent. It is at the end of the day, the economies of this country are going to be driven by educated people. Allegheny Ludlam is a major stainless steel maker, and they're building a new steel mill in Pittsburgh, just north of Pittsburgh. It's a $2 billion investment, and I know the people involved with the company. And I went up to them and said, this is great news, but why are you building a new steel mill in Pittsburgh? And they said, because labor costs are not important anymore. Where there'd be 5,000 people making steel in this mill 20 years ago, there are going to be 450. And transportation costs and energy costs, and we're in the middle of the Marcellus Shale stuff, are all more important factors for us in locating a factory than labor costs, where would drive us to China otherwise. And so that's the future. Those 450 people making steel are driving computers probably more so than driving rolling mills, okay? And that's the challenge that every city needs to understand. If you're entrepreneurial, and you know, this is sort of an oxymoron when you come to politics. This is about being a risk taker. Being a risk taker, what it means to take risk. And that's tough when you're an elected official, because the risk might have an upside, but it might have a downside, and the media always wants to report on the downside more than they want to report on the upside. I learned that lesson. That's why my hair's so gray. And the other is partnerships, and this is where government comes in. Government needs to be a good partner, needs to be entrepreneurial with a private developer or somebody wanting to invest in your community, about having shared goals. You know, when I was mayor, people would come in, developers would come into Pittsburgh and into my office and say, Mayor, I have a great idea for you. And I'd say, with all due respect, tell me why it's a great idea for you. We'll decide whether it's a great idea for us. And if our self-interests converge, we'll figure out how to make it happen. We'll form a great partnership. That assumed we knew what we wanted. That's the first lesson. You need to know what you want, what you need to be in 20 years, where you want to go. You need to have a vision. I see far too many cities that makes decisions transactionally. A developer comes in and says, I want to fix this building up. And that building is sort of like an island to that developer, or a vacant lot. I want to build this on a vacant lot. You know, the developer's focused on, how do I make money from that vacant lot? You need to be the growing up in the room. If you're an elected official, you need to say, how does that fit in to where we want to be? Does it get to the quality? Is it the right use? Does it move our community forward? And we all see those sort of missing teeth all over America, where people have built inappropriate things. Or how many of you have driven down a road and you want to go to the store here and you want to go to the store next door, but you got to pull in off the highway to this store, and then you got to go out on the highway and pull in to the driveway again, because there's no connection. Nobody thought about it's how there. That's a series of developments by transaction, not about thinking about it. And there are important issues about how you build equality. And so let me give you some examples of leadership and how cities are making intentional decisions. The residents of 7 counties around Denver, including Denver, voted to raise their sales tax in 2004 to build a 120-mile transit system. You know, nobody likes to raise taxes, but they have a referendum. The citizens voted for it. Over 60% voted for it because the concern was that the the whole reason that people love Denver, the Rocky Mountains, they were losing it because of pollution. And the sprawl going up, if you can notice, going up the sides of the mountains. And they wanted to think about how to do denser, more compact development and get people to drive less. So they financed that. And how many of you have been to Denver lately? If you've been to downtown Denver, you know down where there was an abandoned railroad station, really one train a day coming through Union Station, there is now a $2 billion development happening. It's actually mostly out of the ground, 3,500 residents. This is where the transit system comes together. It was an old railroad yard around this train station. It is, I think, the best development in America right now. Remarkable development of what a vision and how you use that vision to drive the future of your city. It's a remarkable example. How many of you have been to Chicago? So if you've been to Chicago, chances are you visited Millennium Park. So Millennium Park 10 years ago was an abandoned railroad yard. And Mayor Daley's idea was that we were going to buy it and put a 2 or 3 level parking garage and cap it with a grass field extending Grand Park. And some of the private citizens of Chicago said, you know, we have this incredible waterfront park and we're going to do that. Let's do something much more visionary. And driven by the private sector, they developed Millennium Park, largely financed by the private sector. It is now the most visited place in Chicago. It has generated several $1 billion worth of development around it, condominiums. It is an example of what an exciting vision can do in transforming a place that was a relatively dead spot in downtown Chicago. So it's about building vibrancy, and whether you're a small town with a park in the middle of the city, or that you can think about how to use it to transform your community, or whether you're on a waterfront, whether it's a stream or a river, or how you use that to transform opportunity, that's a big challenge. Oklahoma City, one of the most conservative places in America. The citizens there made a decision, again, voting on raising the sales tax, and they have to redo it every 4 years. They've done it 3 times now. And the purpose of it was to invest in Oklahoma City. Oklahoma City was going nowhere. It was largely a lot of surface parking lots. If you go to Oklahoma City today, you will see billions of dollars worth of development spurred by an effort to build new parks and a trail in downtown. And now you have a lot of energy companies building their buildings not out in the suburbs but in the city because it is such a great place and a lot of residential. How many of you walked on closer to home? Imagine you're at a meeting when the city's called to tear that trestle down. How many of you have been on the High Line? So for those of you who haven't, get on the train and ride down and take a walk. It will blow you away. And I mean, there literally was a meeting called by the city and the proposed tearing this trestle down that ran down the west side of Manhattan. And 3 young people said, no, don't tear it down. We climb up there. It's a great place. It would make a great park. Who could have imagined? And if you go there now, you'll see a spectacular example of what good architecture can do, but you'll see billions of dollars worth of new development. And the biggest development happening in America right now on the railroad yards coming into New York City related is doing that. And I was at a presentation with them, and the first thing they said, you know, we're building this, I don't know, $6-7 billion investment there, and it's going to connect right into the High Line. That's their calling card. Who would have imagined? That's what you need to do. You need to imagine, how do you create that kind of opportunity in your town? I'm going to switch a little bit and talk about the economy and about talent, because the places that are being driven by tech jobs now have a much faster growing 4 times faster growing those communities than the overall economy. Pittsburgh's one of those communities, and I'll talk about that. And there's great examples, and this is about intentionality. So the Research Triangle in North Carolina, Raleigh, Durham, and Chapel Hill, cities that are probably the size of some of your cities, maybe even a little smaller. They were, true story, 6 guys get rained out of a golf game back in the early 60s, and they're having a drink in the clubhouse, and they're lamenting the fact, and this might sound familiar to you, certainly in Pittsburgh, they're lamenting the fact they send their kids off to college and they don't come back. The only thing to do at Raleigh, Durham, and Chapel Hill was to work in the tobacco industry or to make furniture. So those 6 guys went out and bought 7,000 acres of land, tobacco farms. Between Raleigh, Durham, and Chapel Hill, they created a nonprofit organization, and they called it the Research Triangle. They partnered with the city. They partnered with the universities and the state. It is to this day a nonprofit, privately driven organization. It has the highest per capita income, and 40,000 people work there today. It is the economic driver of North Carolina. It is a remarkable story. A key part of this was the community college that in North Carolina historically had some of the best community colleges in the country that prepared people for not just the high-level scientific jobs, but the technicians and the other jobs that made this a very attractive place to locate. And so it is redoing itself because it was built on a 60s model, but it continues to be hugely successful. San Diego, 20 years ago, was a sleepy naval town. The mayor and private leadership in San Diego made a decision in 1970 to get an engineering school to come there. And by 1980 and 1990, they made a decision they were going to try to drive a technology economy. Today, San Diego has the 5th largest technology economy in America. It is, again, about intentionality. It's about choices people make to be something other than what they were. And now I bring you to my city. That's Pittsburgh. And as Jonathan said, Pittsburgh underwent the most devastating collapse of any major city in America until more recently Detroit, and even deeper than Detroit. And so when I'm a young boy growing up in Pittsburgh, this is what our city looked like. And notice the clock. It's 8:30 in the morning. That was Pittsburgh. And so leadership in the 60s and the 70s focused on what it meant to clean up the air and the water in Pittsburgh. And so we were able to do that. This is downtown Pittsburgh that we were losing. It was largely failing. And I'll talk a little bit about this because part of the conversation for this conference is about downtown. So Pittsburgh was like many other cities. People were leaving. Nobody lived downtown. Corporations were slowly migrating out of the city. We made, in part, this was the leadership of the foundations, particularly the Heinz Foundation. This area right here, you see squared off there, was our red light district. 25 years ago, it had 22 massage parlors and porno theaters in that area. It looked like Times Square. And the Heinz Endowment by the foundations, and the city was a supporting partner, began to buy some of those buildings. And those buildings got transferred into the ballet and the opera and live theater and the symphony. And today, in that area, there are 1,500 legitimate performances happening. I understand legitimate, okay? There's one strip joint. We figure we ought to leave one, right, just for people who want to do it. And it is a wonderful example of how culture and the arts can drive an economy. Because restaurants grew up, and now there are thousands of people living in the upper floors of the older buildings there. And then we made a decision when we were making a decision to build a new ballpark. Some of you might remember Three River Stadium. We make a decision to locate a baseball park here, the football stadium there, in the new convention there to support the idea of vibrancy. And so this bridge here, when there's a ball game, we shut that bridge down. If you want to park at that garage there, it will cost you $40 during the ball game. If you want to park at a garage right there and walk across the bridge, it will cost you $5. We control the parking, and so we wanted people to park downtown, go to the restaurants and bars, and the Cultural Trust to support all that. So 10,000 people going to a game when the Pirates are winning are parking downtown and walking across the bridge. So it's about how you connect things to build excitement, okay? So that's our Cultural Trust District today. That building was a burlesque house in the 25 years ago, and we built really interesting places where people can sit out and have a sandwich and create a great sense of place. It's called placemaking. The school district created a performing arts high school. This is not only for the school district in the city of Pittsburgh. We have 43 school districts in Allegheny County. It's sort of like all of you, I think, isn't it? But kids, our son went there, and kids from all over the region goes there. It's in the Cultural Trust District. And so that is a performing arts high school there. And so if the symphony doesn't sell out, or theater doesn't sell out, or the ballet sell out, they'd come over to the school and say, we have tickets for $5. And my son was always calling up and say, Dad, I need $20. We're going to stay downtown and have dinner and go to the ballet. Don't you want your kids to live like that? Isn't that how you want a city to work? And by locating both the middle school and the high school performing arts facilities in the downtown, you build on that. And I don't know whether you have one here, but maybe you all ought to get together, all your, how many school districts? 100 school districts, and all get together and think about creating a performing arts facility that is located and helps to anchor a cultural area here. That's what our rivers look like. Jonathan referred to that. When I was growing up in Pittsburgh, my mother would always say two things when I was going out to play: be home before the streetlights are on. She'd say, never go near those rivers. You're going to melt if you go in those rivers. And they were bad. I mean, they were really bad, and they were dangerous, and it caught on fire occasionally because of the pollution in the rivers, and that's our river now. Did you know about the big rubber duck? Have you seen it around here? It brought hundreds of thousands of people down to our waterfront, as you can see, to play. And people boat in the rivers now and actually fish in our rivers and eat the fish even. And so it's a pretty remarkable change that happened. And I mentioned the North Shore. We built the ballparks. This is the old ballpark, and it was built in 1970. How many of you are architects or planners? So what were you smoking or drinking in the 60s and 70s? Because you built these things. This is right on the waterfront, overlooking a great city. And what's the highest and best use of that land? A road right on the river and a surface parking lot, 30 acres of parking. So the Steelers lost the Super Bowl, so we blew it up. And we built a new football stadium. I just was there. I can't hear it all. I was there Saturday night for a Rolling Stones concert, and I still can't hear well, but it was a great concert. And we built a new baseball park, pretty well ranked by everybody as the best baseball park in America. We built a new convention center, the largest certified green building in America, in the mid-'90s when we built it. And that's that waterfront. We took the road off the river. We moved it back, and we began to develop on the parking lots. And so we have now about $400 or $500 million between the two ballparks there. You need to take advantage of your assets. And the waters, for many communities, are your biggest asset. Maybe you have a road on it, and maybe it's sort of a place that nobody would think about going. You've got to imagine what it can be, because water is a place of magic that you can create. And then we had thousands of acres of abandoned steel mills. So between 1978 and 1985, Pittsburgh lost 150,000 jobs in 7 years as the steel mills shut down. The oldest steel mills in the world now were uncompetitive, as Germany and Japan and Korea were more competitive. And so these mills, my father worked in this steel mill for 51 years. And where 10,000 men and women made steel, there's now a cheesecake factory. He would shoot me if he were alive. You know, and there are almost $700 million worth of new investment of technology companies have located offices there. If any of you have teenagers, you would know American Eagle Clothing maybe, and they moved their headquarters from New York and a suburb in Pittsburgh to locate there because they loved the vibrancy. They loved the sort of what was going on. It's a retail, it's several, almost 1,000 units of housing and probably almost 24 office buildings now that are located there. On an old steel mill site, 120, 30-acre steel mill site. And let me just say this to elected officials. This is the choice that we made in Pittsburgh. When I was becoming mayor, Pittsburgh was on a sharp trajectory of decline, had been for 20 years. Between 70 and 90, our region lost 500,000 people. No place in America had seen that kind of loss. This is why we have so many Steeler fans all over America, because they were all our failures. We couldn't keep them in Pittsburgh because we couldn't give them a future. And so I'm becoming mayor when we are still on that trajectory. And I make a fundamental decision that sounds good, very controversial. The decision is that we're not going to manage decline anymore. We're going to imagine a city that's growing. Now, who could be against that, right? So when I reduced the city's workforce, including the number of police officers, by 200, and shifted $6 million a year out of our operating budget to finance a $60 million development fund, there was lots of controversy. We were a flat broke city. And so when I go to cities, those 51 cities, and cities say to me, and you'll say to me, we'd love to do something like this, big or small, but we can't afford it. And I'll ask you what your budget is. And your budget might be $50 million or $400 million. And I'll say, what do you mean you can't afford it? You're lying to me. It's not about the money, it's about the priority. If you're going to change, if you're going to reach for the future, you need three things. You need money, you need land control, and you need sophisticated deal-making capacity. You need those in one place. And you need to be able to run over people. My view is that when you run for office, you have a choice. You either want to be loved or effective. You can't be both. Because we're at a time when you need to make difficult decisions. To know where you're going and to position it to yourself to compete. So we created a $60 million development fund. We put it in, we have a redevelopment agency, we put it in that redevelopment agency. The second thing we did with that money is that we went out and bought 1,500 acres of land. Whole steel mills we bought. We bought an old Sears that had failed because we said we can sit here and look at this stuff for the rest of our lives, or we can sort of figure out what we're going to do and move to the future. And so when I ran for election I had been mayor in my second time when I'm running, my opponent, his whole campaign was pictures of vacant steel mills saying the mayor's wasted all of our money buying this useless land when we could have had more police. That's a choice. Do you invest in just today? Meaning you invest in your police, which you need, obviously, and you invest in public works, and you do, and all your resources get invested today. So how do you get to the future? That's a hard decision. And you need to think about how you make that decision. I don't know your community is big or small. The question of where you create value in that community, whether is an old industrial factory there that's sitting there, or it's an area within your downtown that's blighted. Can you partner with that, or do you buy it? You know, that's controversial when you go buy steel mills and you've not even tested them for environmental stuff. You know, and we could do that, and say, you know, and that could take another 20 years, or we can say, you know what, we're going to move on here. And I'm talking about a city that had a 12% funded pension fund. Okay? And was ranked right before junk bond status. And I kept going to the bond rating agencies in New York and saying, stay with us. We're going to change this city. So at the end of the day, you can brag about your AAA bond rating and your 100% fund pension, but if your city is in a decline and it is that mode, then that means nothing. You need to think about how you grow your community. So this is a neighborhood of Pittsburgh that was a failed, called East Liberty, and it was a failed urban renewal area. In the 60s and 70s, the city invested all this money in this neighborhood, sort of classic urban renewal, car-centric, tore out the grid pattern, put in wide roads, and it all failed. And this is about a 10-square block area. On one side of it is the poorest neighborhood of Pittsburgh, and on the other side of it is the richest neighborhood in Pittsburgh. And the poor neighborhood took over this neighborhood. And so we bought an old Sears building there. At 20 acres. Sears gave up on the place and left. And we buy that when we're buying all this 1,500 acres. And we say to what were people thinking? Look at how that high-rise is built over a road there. You see that? And so we go to, we decide what's going to bring rich people and poor people back to this neighborhood to shop. And we decided it was a Home Depot. This is in the mid-90s. There were no Home Depots anywhere in America, urban Home Depots. They were all out in the suburbs on the interstate. And so we went to the real estate people at Home Depot and said, we'd like to talk to you about putting a store there. And they laughed at us and said, it's not where we would put a store. And so I called up the mayor of Atlanta and I said, tell me about the two guys that own Home Depot. And he said, Bernie Marcus particularly is very philanthropic in Atlanta and is very active in national Jewish affairs. And so I went to my friends in the Jewish community, said, can you invite Bernie Marcus to speak at one of your dinners here? And they did, and a few months later he came, and another friend hosted him at a reception at his house. And my bodyguard, who carried a gun, and he was a police officer, walked up to Bernie Marcus, and it's a true story, and said, we're kidnapping you for a half hour. And he said, you're joking, right? And I said, no, you have time. Come on with us, because we think you can make our dreams happen. And so Bernie Marcus got in the car and came out, and we showed him this site and said, we want you to put a Home Depot there. And he said, boy, this is not where we would think about putting a Home Depot. But by the end of the evening, he came up to me. He said, we'll put a Home Depot there. He said, but you need to be a partner. Now, I got criticized because we subsidized Home Depot, okay, to locate there. We had to buy property, discounted the property for them. And so that Home Depot opened. 80% of the people that work there walk to work. They come from the poor part of the neighborhood. And it is the highest sales volume today, as it was the day it opened, in the whole Pittsburgh region. So that led to a young developer coming to us and saying, I think I could get, if you work with us, I think I could get Whole Foods to think about coming to Pittsburgh. We had no Whole Foods in Pittsburgh at all. First Whole Foods opened right down the street from Home Depot. It was the Rookie of the Year store, highest volume per square foot sales, and it had the highest percentage of food stamps of any store in the country being used there, which shows you that poor people, given the choice, will eat well also, okay? And then that led to us blowing up that building and 3 others and doing some mixed income housing, and it led to Whole Foods and Trader Joe's and a new Target. And then there was this big old Nabisco bakery that had been abandoned there, 8 stories, vacant. Developer had bought it, didn't know what he was going to do with it. At the same time, Google was working, doing some research in Carnegie Mellon University, and Google was really succeeding on this research and said, you know, we're going to grow in Pittsburgh. So Google now has 600 jobs in this building. So what's the relationship between Home Depot and Google? Is they both were willing to take risk with us. 70% of the people that work at Google either ride a bike or walk to work. So this is 15 years ago, a neighborhood you wouldn't have gone on. Imagine the most blighted neighborhood in your community, wherever that may be. That was East Liberty for us. It is now incredibly vibrant. There's an Indigo Hotel going there. Can't believe that. So I just want to give you, this is right at the doorway to the University of Pittsburgh. And that was, for 50 years, the highest and best use of that property. You have them all over your community, don't you? You have them by your train stations. The surface parking lot. The blight of America. So we had 600 people that parked there every day. And we said, you're going to have to move. And of course, they all hated me, right? They parked there every day. And we put a park there instead. It is now the front door to the University of Pittsburgh. It's packed. There's a restaurant there. There's a carousel there. It is a great place just to hang out. It created a sense of place. It wasn't that expensive. It was controversial for a while. But now people love it, right? And so should government get out of the way? Really? Government needs to be the grown-up, needs to have the vision, needs to create great places. And so these are the principles of success. This is your valley. You need to think strategically. If you don't know where you're going to screw up. You need to be really focused on where you're going. You need to be leaders. Too many people want to follow the prey. You need to be willing to take risks to be a leader. Joe Rowley has been the mayor of Charleston for 40 years. He's retiring at the end of the year. He was looking at life very differently until last Wednesday. I was with him Monday and Tuesday, actually. But 40 years ago, he imagined Charleston after a hurricane. People weren't sure what was going to happen. He imagined historic preservation as the cornerstone of driving that city. It is the best city, small city in America. He's the best mayor in America. Because Joe would show these pictures of this incredible building, you know, that was in Charleston. And he said, we had this building, and, you know, and we didn't like it, and this is what we wanted it instead, and it's a Motel 6. How many of you have done that? You know, he shows a picture of this house on fire. Flames are shooting out of the roof. And the second picture is the next day. It shows the house all gutted. And his building inspector came to him and said, Joe, we got to tear this down. It's going to fall in the street and hurt somebody. And he said, well, shut the street down. And then he shows you a picture of that house restored, and it's in the middle of a beautiful row of houses, you know, and it'd be like this missing tooth if it was a vacant lot there. That's vision. That's what you need to bring to the table. It's about partnerships of how you bring. This is not about you, elected officials or private sector or the college or the community college. It's about what that vision is that brings everybody together so that everybody is moving in the same direction. Every community has silos. You need to break those down. Everybody needs to be moved. There's too much competition. You have too many assets that are being wasted here because you're all not moving in the same direction. And I mentioned talent. China has tripled the number of people in a university in the last 11 years because they understand what the competitive advantage is for a community. You need to be focused on that, of how you grow people, create talent, and then how you create the jobs and how do you create the great place because the talent wants to live here. I'll give you a quick example. 30 years ago, Pittsburgh, out of the top 100 cities in America, had the lowest percentage of people who had high school degrees. The lowest percentage. We're second in the country now. In Pittsburgh, the business leadership of Pittsburgh, the hospitals and the business, not government, the business leadership, made a decision that every kid that graduates from the Pittsburgh Public School will get a $40,000 scholarship. And they've raised $260 million to put into a fund to endow that. Let me say that again. Every kid that graduates from the Pittsburgh Public School gets a $40,000 scholarship to go to any university, college, technical school, or community college in the state of Pennsylvania. That's what it means to invest in talent. Now, you're going to say, we can't do that. You can do that. And then I mentioned this. You have a choice. When I drive into Newburgh or Rockland County, there will be a sign inevitably that says, welcome to Newburgh, right? We're a world-class community, or we're something or another. But depending on the choices you make, the sign might as well say, welcome to Newburgh, we're an it'll-do city. Do you want that on your sign? You want to be an it'll-do community? You have incredible assets here. You're in one of the most historic places in America. You need to have on that sign, we are a great place. And that will be determined by the quality of what you build. So don't ever sort of say, it'll do. It's all we can afford. Build the best park in the world in your city. Build a great riverfront. If a developer is going to build buildings or housing, make sure it's really quality. So we're sitting where Horatio Nelson Jackson sat. We're looking at a world that is fundamentally getting changed. And you have a series of choices. You can decide what kind of city you want to be because it's getting remade. Your communities all are getting remade right now. And you can decide what that is. You know, and I've been there. You know, every time you suggest something new or different, there are going to be at least 100 people showing up in a meeting saying it's too big, it's too small, it's the wrong color, and always there's never enough money. They either get to define the agenda or you run them over. And you make a decision that you're moving to the future. That's your choice. Your choice is to go to the lowest common denominator or to reach. I challenge you to reach. You can do this. You have great assets. Put them together. Good luck. I don't know whether you want to do questions. Yeah. Do you have any questions? Am I between you and lunch? I don't want to be between you and lunch.
Anyone? Sure.
Where did you get this drive to reach? Because you didn't just plop into being the mayor. What is it about you that gave you...
Because I can't figure out what I want to be when I grow up is the problem, okay? If I gave you my quick agenda, you know, I have an undergraduate degree, and I was actually in the seminary, and then I left that and went and got a degree in biology and chemistry and went to work for Alcoa in research. And I always wanted, my wife, I'm married, and my wife and I always wanted to go to the Peace Corps, and we went to Peace Corps in Paraguay and worked in South America in a remote village, and that changed my life. I fell in love with the idea of what it means to build a community. And that is what drives me. It is about what makes a community. So I came back and got a master's actually in New York City at Hunter College in urban planning, and then I went back and for all of you old enough, maybe you might remember a guy named Saul Alinsky. I became a community organizer, and the city was the adversary, right? They had, the neighborhood where I was a community organizer, it was all that sort of 60s and 70s slated for demolition, highways and big buildings, and there are now 3 National Historic Districts there, so we were fighting to save them, and there were 6 of us that met every week, plotting what do we need to do and how do we get people to stand in front of a bulldozer to stop the demolition, and we decided one of us needed to be in politics because that's where the power was, and I got the short straw. And I ran against an incumbent, and we had a big, strong ward system, if you know what I mean, in Pittsburgh. It's Boss Tweed kind of ward system and Daley ward system. We had the same thing, and I ran against an incumbent, a legislator, and to everybody's surprise, won. And got involved then in sort of the combination neighborhood stuff, and then same experience with the mayor, running for mayor. And I, just as an aside, so the day I get sworn in, it literally starts to snow, and it snows for 2 days, and my chief of staff was one of those 6 community organizer, and my housing director was another one, and we're sitting in the office, and the office is this incredibly beautiful turn-of-the-century office, very ornate. And we start laughing because we felt like the revolutionaries who had taken over the palace and we had no idea what to do, right? How to get the snow off the road. It was a very humbling moment. That it's very different to criticize, not to run something, okay? So it stayed with me for a long time. So I just care deeply, and I think you see it, deeply about cities. I can drive into a city and I can say, this city is moving one way or the other. And so I never thought I'd be mayor of Pittsburgh. My father never even graduated from high school. He worked in a steel mill for 51 years. And, you know, the idea of one of us being a mayor was inconceivable. And so when I became mayor, I made a decision, because I've been in the legislature and I watched the city decline and watch us make these incremental decisions, that we're not changing the trajectory of our city. And so I said, you know, screw it. We're going to take these huge risks. Now, the older I got, and I've come to realize there are two traits in a person that I think are the most important traits. And this is in your, not just in political life, but in life. It's about having an appetite for risk, and it's about a curiosity. It's about, you know, the bear went over the mountain to see what he could see. It is about that. It is about always wanting to know what's over the next mountain and being willing to take the risk to go there. Look, I had some great failures. I showed you some of the successes. I had some great failures where we lost a lot of public money and I got criticized, and we made some bad decisions. You're going to do that. But you need to take those risks, because staying where we are now, whether you're a small town or a big city, it's not going to work. Yes?
So, how do you get the citizens as excited as you are about this kind of stuff?
What's that?
How do you get your citizens as excited as you are about these kind of changes?
So that was, I'm glad you asked that, and that was there's a big challenge, okay? So Pittsburgh was rooted in the old Pittsburgh. We would make a joke about ourselves. We would say, when the world ends, you want to live in Pittsburgh, because you have 10 more years to live. You get that? We don't make changes very easily, okay? And so it was very hard, and I, you know, and the city was extraordinarily split between people that were rooted in the old Pittsburgh and wanted to keep the old Pittsburgh, and the city people that were willing to take a risk. So the unions picketed me when I first announced as mayor. Pittsburgh is a strong union town. And what would be the proudest day of my life, announcing for mayor, there were 200 union members there picketing me, because they did not see a high technology city as a future for themselves. And so, just to give you a sense of the opposition, okay? And so, I'll give you one more sense quickly. You saw those two ballparks and the stadium. So, the state legislature wanted to invest. We were not a referendum state normally, and we had to build, I won't tell you the whole story, we had to build a new baseball park, led to a new football stadium, led to a new convention center. 4 months into being mayor, I said, rather than us building one at a time, let's just try to figure out how to build all three of them. We're flat broke. It's easy to say that when you have no money, okay? And so the legislature, Tom Ridge is the governor. I love him. It was the best governor I served under. He's a Republican, I'm a Democrat, really, when bipartisanship was still around. But the legislature says, if you want to raise, we propose raising the sales tax 0.5% to pay for these. 70% of the people voted against it. A month later, I said, we're going to figure out how to finance these things and not have to do another referendum and raise the sales tax. And Tom Ridge stuck with us. He put some state money in. We raised $900 million locally. It was about $1.4 billion to build those and the roads and the parks and all that stuff. We figured out how to do that. 70% of the people were mad at me. Now when I speak in Pittsburgh, I say, so how many of you voted against building the ballparks? Of course, nobody raises their hands, right? I said 70% of you did. Okay, and everybody loves them, and there's hundreds of millions of dollars of development going on there. And we didn't have a winning team for 20 years in baseball, and yet they did really well because people love going to the ballpark. So that's the decision, that's the leadership decision. I think you have to listen to people really hard. But at the same time, you need to sort of know what you need to do. And let me end your question, long answer. When my wife and I were in the Peace Corps, we lived a 3-day boat ride up the Paraguay River in the jungle, and we spoke Spanish, and through the jungle was Brazil a few miles, and they spoke Portuguese, and around us were a variety of Indian tribes who spoke different dialects. And we learned an enduring lesson there. And the lesson that we learned, that every elected official needs to know, the enduring lesson we learned wasn't the person with all the guns or all the money that was the most powerful person in town. It was the person who spoke all the languages. And when we came back to the United States, and actually imagine, we moved from there, where there were 2,500 people living in the jungle, to New York City, the Lower East Side. We came to realize that our society is equally divided by race, by class, by ethnic origin. If you work in computers, I have no idea what you're talking about most of the time. And so the most powerful person is the person who is the translator. We don't value that, but that was my challenge as a mayor, is how do I translate a vision for somebody, whether they were working in a steel mill and they haven't now because it's been shut down for 10 years, or a person coming out of Carnegie Mellon University with a PhD. How do I shape a vision that they see a place for themselves in Pittsburgh? We had become the second oldest county in America. Dade County being the oldest. We were the second oldest, not because people were retiring to Pittsburgh, but all our young people were leaving. Over the last census time, we've become 4 years younger in Pittsburgh, as young people are now coming back to the city. So that conversation you have about where you want to go, and we spent a lot of time, lots of meetings, trying to talk about the future. Thank you. Good luck.
So I think back over 31 years of working where I've always said, well, how did Pittsburgh do it? I mean, it takes leadership, it takes a vision, it takes enthusiasm, and it takes the ability to convey it and convince others that you're going to change. It's a very, very difficult set of equation, but if it can happen in Pittsburgh, it's been my line for years, why can't it happen somewhere else? So I really appreciate that. Okay, so we're going to move, we have a meeting now for the representatives from the 25 Urban Action Agenda. Robin, where are we relocating?
We're going to relocate, so if everybody just gathers together, we'll all walk over to the meeting room.
All right, and for everyone else, thank you for coming. I hope you got something out of the morning, and appreciate it.